Hello, I am the Wizard of Tales, and I'm here to guide you today. I know this video is the perfect companion to help my dear dreamers relax and drift off to sleep. Before we dive into a world of calm and serenity, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Now, get cozy, take a deep breath, and let the magic of stories embrace you. In a small town in the countryside, where the stories of Brazilian folklore still echoed through the corridors of the old houses and the dirt roads, lived Sophia, a 12-year-old girl known for her insatiable curiosity and a peculiar hobby of collecting lost objects. Her grandmother Dona Benedita, a gray-haired lady with a warm smile, always told her that those objects weren't really lost. They were Seisai's prigs. Sophia lived with her grandmother in a yellow house on the side of a dirt road that meandered through the forest. The yard was a veritable paradise, full of fruit trees, cackling chickens, and an old horse called Ventania, which had belonged to her late grandfather. Every morning, the girl woke up early to brush the animal's mane, which mysteriously donned with several small, tight braids. "It's him again, Grandma," exclaimed Sophia, trying to undo the knots while Ventania neighed nervously. Seisai passed by. Dona Benedita just smiled, shaking her head as she prepared breakfast in the tiled kitchen. "That little bugger never lets up," she replied, neither confirming nor denying the existence of the mischievous creature. At school, Sophia was considered different by her classmates. While the other children dreamed of smartphones and video games, she carried an old wooden box where she kept her lost treasures, colorful buttons, faded ribbons, small keys without locks, and even a rusty pocket watch she had found on the way to school. Miguel, his best friend and neighbor, was the only one who shared his fascination with folk tales. Together, they spent hours investigating the mystery surrounding the region, especially after strange events began to intensify in the city. It all started when important objects began to mysteriously disappear. First, it was Professor Rita's wedding ring, then the keys to SCU Jose's grocery store, and even the church bell disappeared for a few hours, inexplicably reappearing at the top of a mango tree. The townspeople began to get restless. Some blamed the children, others suspected thieves, but Sophia and Miguel were sure it was Seisai's doing. At night, when the wind blew stronger through the trees, they could swear they heard mischievous laughter and the smell of pipe smoke hung in the air. One day, after another morning of undoing the braids in Ventania's mane, Sophia discovered something different among her treasures. A small fragment of red fabric, glowing like hot coals, which seemed to give off a heat of its own. "Grandma," she shouted, running into the house. "Look what I found!" Dona Benedita adjusted her glasses and examined the piece of cloth with unusual interest. Her eyes sparkled in a way that Sophia had never seen before. "My granddaughter," she said in a soft voice, "this isn't just any cloth. It seems to be a piece of Seisai's cap." The revelation made Sophia's eyes widen. According to the legends her grandmother used to tell, the red cap was the source of Seisai's powers. Without it, the creature would lose most of its magic. "But how did it get here?" she asked, fascinated. "Seisai must be getting careless," replied Dona Benedita with a mysterious smile. "Or maybe he wants to be found." That same night, while Sophia was trying to sleep, she heard a peculiar whistle coming from the backyard. It was a melody that seemed to dance with the wind, alternating between happy and melancholy notes. Through her bedroom window, she saw a figure jumping between the trees, leaving a trail of pipe smoke in the air. Sophia's heart beat faster. Years of listening to her grandmother's stories hadn't prepared her for this moment. There he was, Seisai in the flesh, hopping around on his one leg, with his pipe lit and without his full red cap. Miguel, who was sleeping next door, had also seen something. The next morning, on the way to school, he was agitated. "Sophia, you won't believe it. Last night, all the pans from the kitchen appeared on the roof of my house." Sophia showed her friend the piece of red fabric, and together they began to draw up a plan. If they could find Seisai and return the piece of the hat, perhaps they could make a deal with him. After all, in Dona Benedita's stories, Seisai could be a great friend when treated with respect. But there was something else going on in town. The mischief was different, more frequent, and some of it even harmful. Important crops began to be destroyed. Animals ran away from the pastures without explanation, and a climate of tension hung in the air. "There's something wrong," said Sophia to Miguel, as they watched yet another mess in the central square, where all the flowers in the garden had been uprooted and replanted upside down. "The Seisai we know from the stories wouldn't harm the plants. He's mischievous, but not evil." It was then that Dona Benedetta revealed a secret she had been keeping for a long time. Sitting with Sophia and Miguel on the veranda as the sun set over the horizon, she began, "There is more than one Seisai in our forest, children, and not all of them are just playful." Sophia squeezed the fragment of the red cap in her hand, feeling its mysterious warmth. She didn't know it yet, but she was about to embark on an adventure that would forever change her outlook on the legends she loved so much, on friendship and on the true meaning of courage. Dona Benedetta's revelation about the existence of more than one Seisai left Sophia and Miguel stunned. The lady, sensing the children's curiosity, settled down in the rocking chair and continued her explanation as dusk tinted the sky orange. A long time ago, there was a balance in the forest. The Saises were guardians of nature, each responsible for a different area. Some looked after the plants, others the animals, and there were those who protected travelers, even if it was through their mischief, explained Dona Benedetta, her eyes reflecting distant memories. "But what happened to this balance, Grandma?" asked Sophia, holding the piece of red cap tightly. "People started destroying the forest, building more and more, and the Saises lost their space. Some became bitter, others kept their playful nature. But there is one in particular, known as Seisai Tenebroso, who has become truly evil." Miguel waddled. "Is he the one destroying the crops?" "Probably," replied Dona Benedetta. "And from what I can see, he must have done something to the Seisai that used to protect our region. That piece of hat you found, Sophia, belongs to our guardian Seisai." The pieces of the puzzle began to fit together in the children's minds. The heavier pranks, the destruction of the crops, it all made sense now. It wasn't their familiar Seisai, but this other one, the dark one, who was causing trouble. The next morning, Sophia and Miguel decided to investigate further. They started at the spot where Sophia had found the piece of the red cap, near Ventania's stable. The horse seemed more agitated than usual, neighing nervously as the children approached. "Look at that!" exclaimed Miguel, pointing to some marks on the ground. They were small, single-legged footprints, forming a path that led towards the denser forest. Sophia took out of her backpack a small compass she had found in her collections. "Let's follow these footprints," she said, determined. "But first, we need to get ready." The children returned home and filled their backpacks with items they considered essential: a flashlight, water, cookies, and a small bottle of milk, which, according to Dona Benedetta's stories, the Saises loved. Before setting off, Sophia tied the piece of the red cap around her wrist like a bracelet. She immediately felt a comforting warmth spread through her arm. Miguel watched in fascination as the bracelet seemed to glow slightly. Following the footprints, they entered the woods. The path became increasingly difficult, with low branches and vines blocking the way. The air was heavy with the smell of wet earth and decaying leaves. Suddenly, they heard the sound of branches breaking. Hiding behind a large tree, they saw a dark figure leaping out of the shadows. It wasn't the Seisai they knew. This one had a gloomy aura, and his cap, instead of bright red, was a dark red, almost black. "It's the Dark One," Sophia whispered, feeling the piece of hat on her wrist get even hotter. The dark sack stopped in a nearby clearing, letting out a laugh that made the hairs on the back of the children's necks stand on end. He was holding something in his hands. It looked like another red cap, but this one was torn and dirty. "I know you're there, you little busybodies." His voice was hoarse and threatening. "Have you come to look for your little friend Seisai? He's temporarily unwell." Sophia felt an inexplicable courage rise within her. The fragment of the cap on her wrist pulsed, as if it had a life of its own. She took a step forward, ignoring Miguel, who was trying to hold her back. "What do you do to him?" asked Sophia, her voice firmer than she had expected. The Dark One spun around on his one leg, staring at her with eyes that glowed like coals. Well, what have we here? A little heroin? He took a long drag from his pipe, releasing a dark, dense smoke. Your friend Seisai was in my way. These lands are now mine to do with as I please. Miguel joined Sophia, holding his friend's hand. These lands are not yours. You're destroying everything. Destroy? The dark sack laughed again. I'm just paying back what the humans did to us. They destroyed our forests, polluted our rivers. Why should we protect them? Sophia noticed that the fragment of the cap on her wrist was getting harder and harder. On impulse, she lifted it into the air. The piece of fabric began to glow brightly, illuminating the entire clearing with a red light. The Dark One stepped back, covering his eyes. Where did you get that? He growled, his voice a mixture of anger and concern. Before Sophia could answer, a whirlwind of leaves began to form around her. The wind blew stronger, bringing with it the familiar smell of pipe smoke, but not the dark smoke of the Dark One, but the pleasant aroma she knew so well. The children heard a cheerful, mischievous laugh echoing through the woods. It was different from the evil laughter of the Dark One. This one was full of life and fun. The fragment of the cap on his wrist glowed even brighter, as if responding to a call. Looks like we found more than we were looking for, said Sophia to Miguel, as they both watched in amazement at the events around them. The adventure had only just begun, and they knew they would need all their courage and cunning to help their friend Seisai and restore balance to the forest. The joyful laughter materialized into a colorful whirlwind, revealing the guardian Seisai that Sophia and Miguel had been looking for. Unlike the dark Seisai, he had a warm smile and bright eyes. Although he looked weaker and more tired than usual, his cap was incomplete, perfectly matching the fragment that Sophia carried on her wrist. I thought I'd never find this piece, exclaimed the guardian Seisai, hopping around on his one leg. You're very brave to have come all this way, little ones. The Dark One growled, his dark smoke forming ominous shadows all around. You shouldn't have recovered so quickly, he said, advancing menacingly. Sophia, realizing the importance of the moment, quickly untied the fragment of the cap from her wrist. This is what you need, isn't it? She asked the Seisai guardian, holding out the piece of red fabric. Exactly, he replied, his eyes shining with hope. With it, I can regain my powers completely. Miguel watched the dark Seisai attentively as he looked more and more furious. Sophia, watch out, he shouted as the shadowy creature advanced towards his friend. But before the dark sack could reach her, Sophia threw the fragment of the hat at the guardian Seisai. The piece of fabric flew through the air as if it had a life of its own, shining brightly. When it touched the damaged cap, an intense red light enveloped the entire clearing. The Seisai guardian began to spin on its own axis, creating a small whirlpool of leaves and light. His cap, now complete again, glowed with magical energy. Ah, how good it is to be back, he exclaimed, letting out his characteristic cheerful laugh. The Dark One took a few steps back, but maintained his threatening posture. You may have recovered your powers, but you're not alone in this fight, he said, whistling sharply. From the shadows of the forest, other Saces began to emerge. They were different from the Guardian and the Dark One. Some looked confused, others frightened, and there were those who showed clear hostility. Look, cried the Dark One. These are our brothers who have also suffered from the destruction of our home. Why should we continue to protect those who despise us? Sophia stepped forward, feeling a courage she didn't know she possessed. Not all humans are like that, she said, her voice firm. My grandmother always kept the stories about you alive. She taught us to respect nature and its creatures. Miguel joined his friend. It's true, and we're not the only ones. There are many people in the city who still believe in you and try to protect the forest. The guardian Seisai smiled, leaning on his pipe. The children are right, he said, addressing the other Saces. Our mission has always been to maintain the balance. Yes, many humans have destroyed our forests, but others are fighting to preserve them. We must help those who still believe in us. His words seemed to touch some of the Saces, who began to approach him from the shadows. The dark Seisai realized that he was losing his allies. Fools, he shouted. Have you forgotten how we were treated? How they turned us into mere stories to scare children? No, replied the guardian Seisai. We haven't forgotten, but we haven't forgotten who we really are either. We are guardians, protectors. Our pranks have always had a higher purpose, to teach respect and humility. Sophia remembered her grandmother's stories. It's like Donna Benedetta always says, not all mischief is evil. Sometimes we need a bit of confusion to learn something important. One of the Saces who was with Tenebroso giggled. The girl speaks like a true connoisseur of our stories, he said, jumping to the guardian's side. One by one, the other Saces began to do the same, leaving the dark sack increasingly isolated. His dark smoke began to thin, and his dark red cap seemed to lose some of its gloomy shine. It's not over, he growled, before disappearing in a swirl of black smoke. The guardian Seisai sighed. He's right about one thing. It's not over, but now we're united again, and with the help of friends like you, we can protect what's left of our forests. Sophia and Miguel exchanged looks of satisfaction. They had not only found their friend Seisai, but it also helped to bring together the guardians of the forest. What happens now? Asked Miguel, observing the various Saces who now filled the clearing with their laughter and joyful antics. Now, replied the guardian Seisai, we need to restore the balance, and for that, we'll need the help of more people who still believe in us. Sophia immediately thought of her grandmother. Donna Benedetta will be so happy to know that she was right all along. The guardian Seisai gave her a mischievous wink. Your grandmother always knew more than she seemed to, little Sophia. In fact, she's been a great ally of ours for a long time. The children's eyes widened at the revelation. There was much more to discover about Donna Benedetta and her connection with the Saces. But one thing was certain. The adventure was far from over, and new challenges awaited them on the way home. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, as Sophia and Miguel followed the guardian Seisai back to town, accompanied by a joyful procession of bouncing Saces. The air was full of mischievous laughter and pipe smoke, but now was a pleasant smoke that carried promises of better days and many adventures ahead. On the way home, Sophia and Miguel could hardly contain their excitement at their discoveries. The guardian Seisai and his companions accompanied them, invisible to the eyes of the townspeople, but their presence was felt through the little antics they got up to along the way. Leaves dancing in the wind, distant laughter, and the familiar scent of pipe smoke. When they arrived at their grandmother's house, they found Donna Benedetta on the porch, as if she had been waiting for them. Her serene smile revealed that she knew much more than she seemed to. I see you've made new friends, she said, looking directly at the Saces that only children could see. Benedetta, exclaimed the guardian Seisai, making himself visible and bowing comically. How long, my old friend? Sophia and Miguel were stunned. Grandma, can you see them? Asked Sophia, still processing the situation. Of course, my dear, replied Donna Benedetta, getting up from her rocking chair. In fact, it's high time I told you the whole truth. She led everyone into the house, including the Saces, who floated happily around the room. Donna Benedetta went to an old chest that had always remained locked, the same one that Sophia had tried to open several times when she was a child, driven by her natural curiosity. This chest, she explained, reaching for a key hanging around her neck, holds memories of a time when humans and magical beings lived in greater harmony. As she opened the chest, a golden glow emanated from within. Inside were several fascinating objects: an old leather-bound diary, yellowed photographs, small vials of colored substances, and, to everyone's surprise, a red cap very similar to that of the Saces. Grandma, did you? Sophia started to ask, but found herself at a loss for words. Yes, my dear. For many years, I was a human guardian, a bridge between our world and the magical world, Donna Benedetta revealed, stroking the red cap affectionately. Your grandfather was also a guardian. Together, we protected the forest and kept the traditions alive. The guardian Seisai added. Benedetta and Joao were fundamental in keeping our existence a secret during the most difficult times. when modernization threatened to completely erase our presence. Miguel, who was watching everything with fascination, picked up one of the old photographs. It showed a group of people around a campfire, and if you looked closely, you could make out some shadowy shapes that looked like saces. "Were there more human guardians?" he asked. "Many," replied Dona Benedetta. "We formed a protection network. Each region had its own guardians, who worked together with the local magical beings. But over time, people lost their connection with the magical world, and our numbers dwindled." Sophia leafed through the diary found in the trunk, discovering detailed records about the saces, their characteristics, their powers, and, most importantly, the ancient alliances between humans and magical beings. "Is that why the dark sack became so bitter?" she asked. "Because humans have forgotten those alliances?" "Partly," replied the guardian Seisai, taking a thoughtful puff from his pipe. "But the truth is more complex. The Dark One was one of the most powerful among us, and also one of the most attached to humans. When they started destroying the forests and denying our existence, he suffered the most." Dona Benedetta agreed with a sad nod. The pain turned him into something he wasn't. But there is still hope. If we can gather new human guardians and re-establish the old alliances, perhaps we can bring him back to the right path. "We want to be guardians," exclaimed Sophia and Miguel in unison. The guardian Seisai laughed, his laughter echoing through the room like joyful bells. "You already are children. Today you proved it by helping us in the forest. But being a guardian takes more than courage. It takes commitment, wisdom, and, above all, a heart open to the magic of the world." Dona Benedetta opened a small wooden box at the bottom of her trunk. Inside were 2 small pendants in the shape of a red cap. These amulets belonged to other young guardians in the past. Now it's time to pass them on. As he placed the pendants around the children's necks, a sensation of warmth and energy ran through their bodies. It was as if a new awareness was awakening within them. They could feel the presence of magic around them more intensely. "What do we do now?" asked Miguel, still admiring his pendant. "Now," said Dona Benedetta, "we begin the real work. We need to find others who still believe, rekindle the flame of magic in people's hearts, and above all, protect what's left of our forests." The guardian Seisai agreed, his expression more serious than usual. "And we need to prepare ourselves. The Dark One hasn't given up, and I'm sure he's planning something big." As if to confirm his words, a cold, unnatural wind blew through the house, rattling the windows. In the distance, thunder reverberated, even though the sky was still clear. "He's gathering his strength," murmured Dona Benedetta, her worried gaze turned towards the forest. "And he's not alone. There are other creatures of darkness who would like to see the magical world remain in the shadows." Sophia clutched her pendant with determination. "Then we also need to gather our strength. There must be more people in the city who still believe, even if they don't know it." Later that night, Sophia, Miguel, and Dona Benedetta began to draw up their plans. The saces spread out around the town, observing discreetly and identifying possible allies. The guardian Seisai remained nearby, guiding the children through their first steps as guardians. "Everyone has a spark of magic inside them," explained Dona Benedetta as she taught the children how to use their new amulets. "Our job is to help them rediscover that connection." The next morning, on their way to school, Sophia and Miguel began to notice things that had previously gone unnoticed. Through their amulets, they could see little signs of magic everywhere. Flowers that glowed softly at dawn, birds that seemed to carry messages in their songs, and mysterious footprints that appeared and disappeared. At school, Rita, who had lost her wedding ring the day before, was especially receptive to the magic, even without realizing it. When a hummingbird flew in through the classroom window and hovered in front of her for a few moments, her eyes lit up in a special way. "She has potential," whispered the guardian Seisai, invisible to everyone except Sophia and Miguel. "Look at how the plants in her classroom are more lush than the others." During the break, the children began to tell their classmates stories about Brazilian folklore. To their surprise, many were interested, sharing their own experiences of unexplained events. "My grandmother always says there's a curupira protecting the forest near her house," commented Julia, a classmate. And my uncle swears he saw a boitada once, added Pedro, another student. Sophia and Miguel exchanged meaningful glances. The seed of belief was still alive. It just needed to be nurtured. However, their mission was interrupted by a disturbing event. The previously clear sky suddenly darkened. A dense, dark cloud, charged with supernatural energy, began to form over the city. The Dark One was putting his plan into action. He's summoning creatures from the shadows, explained Dona Benedetta as the children ran into her house after school. Beings who, like him, have been corrupted by bitterness and forgetfulness. From the center of the dark cloud, sinister shapes began to emerge. Corrupted batatas, their fiery bodies now black as coal. Shadowy curuparas with glowing red eyes, and other beings from Brazilian legends, all transformed by the evil influence of the dark Seisai Tenebroso. The time has come, said Sophia, her amulet glowing brightly. We need to gather everyone who still believes. Miguel agreed, his own amulet pulsing in tune. But how are we going to do that? Just then Ventania, Sophia's old horse, neighed loudly in the yard. The animal had always had a special connection with the magical world, as evidenced by the braids in its mane. Now this connection could be its greatest advantage. The animals, exclaimed Dona Benedetta. They have always maintained their connection with magic. They can help us awaken people's belief. The guardian Seisai smiled, his mischievous expression returning. And don't forget, we have our own mischief to use against the forces of darkness. Quickly a plan was hatched. While the dark Seisai tried to frighten people with dark manifestations, they would respond with demonstrations of joyful, beneficial magic. The allied Seises spread throughout the city, making flowers sprout instantly, creating rainbows in the middle of a storm, and filling the air with magical music. Sophia and Miguel, riding Ventania, galloped through the streets, their amulets shining like beacons of hope. People began to come out of their homes, amazed by the spectacle. Teacher Rita was one of the first to really see the magic, her eyes opening to a world that had always existed around her. Soon others followed. SCU Jose from the grocery store, the priest from the church, and more locals. The Dark Sacred One, realizing that he was losing strength, decided to make his final move. He descended from the heavens in a whirlwind of darkness, directly confronting Sophia, Miguel, and the guardian Seisai. You don't understand, he shouted. The humans are going to betray you again. They're going to destroy everything once again. You're wrong, replied Sophia, her amulet glowing brighter than ever. People can change, they can learn, and we guardians are here to help them remember the importance of magic and nature. The final showdown was less a battle and more a demonstration of the power of love and belief. Each person who regained their faith in magic was like a blow to the power of darkness. The corrupted beings, one by one, began to return to their original form. Finally, the Dark Sack himself felt the transformation. His dark red cap began to lighten, and the bitterness in his eyes was replaced by tears of understanding. Forgive me, he whispered, as the darkness dissipated from his being. I have forgotten the true meaning of being a guardian. With the victory of light over darkness, a new era began for the small town. People not only believed in the legends again, but became active protectors of nature and magical traditions. Dona Benedetta, proudly watching her young apprentices, knew that the future of magic was in good hands. Sophia and Miguel had proved themselves worthy successors to the ancient line of guardians, and more importantly, they had shown that the power of belief and friendship can overcome any darkness. And so, as the sun set on that memorable day, the sound of mischievous laughter echoed through the town, reminding everyone that magic, after all, had never really left. It was just waiting to be rediscovered by pure hearts and brave souls. The guardian Seisai, reunited with his now restored brothers, including the repentant former Dark One, continued his antics, but now with an even more noble purpose: to keep the flame of magic alive in the hearts of every person willing to believe. And what about Sophia and Miguel? Well, their adventures as guardians had only just begun, but that's a story for another day. The mist crept across the green fields of Ireland as Sarah O'Connor put the last cup of tea on the silver tray that had belonged to her family for generations. The old O'Connor house, built in the 18th century, creaked under the weight of the years and the stories it held in its stone walls. Sarah, a 23-year-old with flame-colored hair and eyes as green as the Irish hills, had returned to the family estate after 5 years studying in Dublin. The reason for her return was not the happiest. Her grandfather, Patrick O'Connor, was ill. The doctors had given him just a few weeks to live, and Sarah felt she had to be there for him in his last moments. Patrick wasn't just her grandfather. He was the guardian of old family traditions and the last living link to her late mother, who had died when Sarah was just 12. As she climbed the stairs to her grandfather's room, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was different that morning. The air seemed thicker, charged with an invisible electricity that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. The old tapestries on the walls seemed to whisper forgotten stories, and the wind blowing through the gaps in the windows produced a sound reminiscent of a distant lament. "How are you feeling today, Grandpa?" asked Sarah, entering the large room where Patrick lay in his canopy bed. The old man, still maintaining his dignified posture, smiled weakly at his granddaughter. "Ah, M.O. Store, you know the O'Connors are as tough as the stones in this house," he replied, his voice hoarse but still carrying the distinctive Irish country accent. "But I need to tell you something important. Sit here." Sarah placed the tray on the side table and sat on the edge of the bed. It was then that she noticed something peculiar. On the bedside table was an antique silver comb that she had never seen before. Her grandfather followed her gaze, and his expression became grave. "It was your grandmother who gave me this comb," Patrick explained, "and before her, it belonged to your great-grandmother. It's more than just a family heirloom, Sarah. It's a sign." "A sign?" Sarah frowned, feeling a shiver run down her spine. "The women in our family have always had a special gift," Patrick continued, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Some can see beyond the veil that separates this world from the next. Your mother had this gift, as did your grandmother before her." Sarah felt her heart race. She had always known that there was something different about her family, especially after her mother's death. On that fateful night, she swore she heard a supernatural scream, a wail that seemed to carry all the sadness in the world. "You're talking about the banshees, aren't you?" Sarah asked, finally verbalizing what her heart already knew. The old stories her mother used to tell her came back to her mind like a whirlwind. Patrick nodded slowly. "The Bean City are more than legends, M.O. Store. They're the messengers between worlds, and some ancient families, like ours, share a special bond with them." It was at that moment that an icy wind swept through the room, making the curtains dance violently. The silver comb on the nightstand vibrated slightly, and Sarah could have sworn she heard a distant whisper, as if someone was singing an ancient Gaelic melody. "The gift is passing to you now, Sarah," said Patrick, holding his granddaughter's hand with surprising strength. "You will begin to see and hear things that others cannot. It's both a blessing and a responsibility." Sarah felt the weight of those words settle on her shoulders. Memories of strange events throughout her life began to make sense. The voices she sometimes heard in the wind, the shadows she saw out of the corner of her eye, the inexplicable sense of presence that had accompanied her since she was a child. "But why now, Grandpa?" "Because the time has come," he replied with a sad smile. "The banshees don't just appear to announce death. They're guardians of the old Irish families. And now, you must take on that role of guardian in our family." Distant thunder echoed across the fields, and Sarah noticed that the mist outside had become thicker, almost supernatural. In the reflection of the window, for a brief moment, she thought she saw a long-haired female figure dressed in green, but when she blinked, the image had disappeared. "What should I do?" asked Sarah, her voice trembling slightly. "Accept who you are," replied Patrick. "The silver comb is yours now. It will help you to see more clearly, to understand your gift. But remember, with great power comes great responsibility. The banshees are not merely messengers of death. They are protectors of ancient bloodlines, guardians of secrets that go back to the earliest days of Ireland." Sarah picked up the silver comb, feeling its weight and the ancient energy emanating from it. The moment her fingers touched the cold metal, a series of images flashed through her mind. Long-haired women dancing in the moonlight, ancient ceremonies in stone circles, laments that echoed through the centuries. The day progressed, and with it, Sarah felt a deeper understanding of her legacy growing inside her. The shadows in the room seemed denser, more alive, and she could swear she heard whispers in an ancient, forgotten language. Her grandfather watched her with a mixture of pride and concern, knowing that the path that lay before her would not be easy. "There's a lot more you need to learn," said Patrick, his voice growing weaker. "Time is running out, and there are secrets that need to be revealed. But first, you must fully accept who you are and what you are destined to become." The mist outside had turned into an impenetrable curtain, and the wind now carried a sound that Sarah could no longer ignore, a distant, ancestral wail, calling her to a destiny she was only just beginning to understand. Dusk was approaching when Sarah finally left her grandfather's room. Her hands were still shaking as she clutched the silver comb, which seemed to pulse with an energy of its own. As she walked down the stairs of the mansion, each step echoed differently, as if the house itself was responding to her newly awakened presence. In the old kitchen, Sarah made more tea, trying to process everything her grandfather had revealed. His words about his gift and the connection with the banshees reverberated in her mind. Memories of her childhood began to emerge in a new light. The stories her mother told her weren't just bedtime stories. They were preparations for this moment. A sudden movement by the window caught her eye. In the laundry area outside, the clothes hanging on the clothesline were dancing violently, even though the air was strangely still. Sarah approached the window and her heart almost stopped. Between the white sheets, there was a female figure with long dark hair, dressed in shades of green, washing something that looked like a bloody garment. "It can't be," Sarah whispered, her hands clenching the windowsill. The figure slowly raised its head, its eyes meeting Sarah's. There was no malice in that look, just a deep, old sadness. The phone rang abruptly, breaking the moment. When Sarah looked out again, the figure had disappeared, leaving only the sheets swaying gently in the evening breeze. Her hands shook as she answered the phone. "Sarah, it's Dr. Murphy." The familiar voice of the family doctor sounded on the other end of the line. "I'm on my way to check on your grandfather. The latest tests have arrived, and we need to discuss a few things." "Of course, doctor," Sarah replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'll be waiting." After hanging up, Sarah climbed the stairs again, each step seeming heavier than the last. The silver comb in her pocket seemed to warm up, as if responding to something she couldn't yet fully understand. In the corridor leading to her grandfather's room, the family portraits on the walls seemed to be watching her more intensely. Sarah stopped in front of the photograph of her mother, taken a few months before her death. Now, with her new understanding, she could see something in her eyes that she had never noticed before, an ancient wisdom, a deep knowledge of things that existed beyond the veil of ordinary reality. "You knew, didn't you, Mom?" murmured Sarah to the portrait. "I knew what happened to me." A soft sound, like the strumming of a harp, floated down the corridor. Sarah closed her eyes, allowing the melody to envelop her. It was an old tune, a Gaelic song her mother used to sing, but there was something different about it now, a supernatural quality that made her heart squeeze. Dr. Murphy arrived shortly afterwards, carrying a folder full of tests and that professional air that masked concern. Sarah led her into her grandfather's room, noticing how the doctor shivered slightly as she entered. "It's colder in here today," commented Dr. Murphy, adjusting her coat. Sarah just nodded, knowing that the cold had nothing to do with the actual temperature of the room. While the doctor examined her grandfather, Sarah watched the shadows in the corners of the room, which seemed to move in impossible ways. Sarah called her grandfather after the examination, his voice weaker than before. "Open the top drawer of the dresser. There's something else you need to see." With trembling hands, Sarah opened the indicated drawer. Inside was an old book, bound in worn green leather, with Celtic symbols engraved on the cover. As she touched it, she felt the same energy emanating from the silver comb. "It's your grandmother's diary," Patrick explained. "She recorded everything she knew about our gift, about the banshees. It will help you better understand what's to come. Dr. Murphy watched the scene with a curious expression, as if she could sense that something important was happening, even if she didn't understand exactly what. Mr. O'Connor, we need to adjust your medication, she said, breaking the moment. And Sarah, can we talk outside for a moment? In the corridor, the doctor was blunt. Sarah, I'm sorry, but your grandfather is getting worse faster than we expected. I suggest you get ready. The doctor's words were interrupted by a distant sound, a wailing that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Dr. Murphy looked around, confused, but it was clear that only Sarah could really hear it in all its intensity. Did you hear something? Asked the doctor. Just the wind, Sarah lied, feeling the weight of the book in her hands and the comb in her pocket. She knew that this lament was only the beginning, that her real test was yet to come. When the doctor left, Sarah took refuge in the house's library, lighting only an old lamp. She opened her grandmother's diary with reverence, the yellowed pages exuding a scent of history and secrets. The first words leapt off the page as if they had a life of their own. To the one who comes after me, know that the gift is not a curse, but a sacred responsibility. The banshees are not just messengers of death. They are guardians of the balance between the worlds. And now, dear granddaughter, it is your turn to carry this burden. Sarah ran her fingers over the words written in elegant calligraphy, feeling a deep connection with her grandmother, whom she had never met. Outside, the mist continued to thicken, and the distant wail of the banshees echoed through the approaching night, beckoning her to a destiny that was only just beginning to unfold. As Sarah immersed herself in the pages of her grandmother's diary, the wind outside the manor increased its intensity. The handwritten words revealed ancient secrets about the banshees and their connection to the O'Connor family. Each page brought with it a new understanding of the gift that now flowed through her veins. The banshees choose their confidants carefully. One passage read, "Not all the women in the family are chosen, only those with the strength to carry the burden of knowledge between the worlds." A sudden noise of breaking glass upstairs snapped Sarah out of her reading. Her heart raced when she realized it was coming from her grandfather's room. Running up the stairs, she found Patrick sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the now broken window. "Grandpa, are you all right?" she asked, hurrying over to him. "They're coming in greater numbers," he replied, his voice carrying a serenity that contrasted with the situation. "The more noble we are in life, the more banshees accompany us on the passage." Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine as she noticed 3 ethereal figures outside the broken window, dressed in shades of green and white. Their long hair danced in the air as if they were underwater. Their faces, although beautiful, carried an ancient sadness. "Don't be afraid," said Patrick, holding his granddaughter's hand. "They are here to honor our family and to guide you in your new role." The silver comb in Sarah's pocket began to vibrate more intensely. When she took it out, she noticed that it shone with a light of its own, silver like moonlight. The banshees outside seemed to react to her presence, their wails becoming more melodious. "Use it," instructed Patrick. "The comb is a bridge between worlds. Through it, you'll be able to understand them better." With trembling hands, Sarah lifted the comb. The 3 figures floated closer to the broken window, their eyes fixed on the object. As Sarah ran the comb through her own red hair, a wave of sensations and images invaded her mind. She saw generations of O'Connor women before her, each carrying the same gift, the same burden. She saw her mother, young and radiant, talking to the same creatures who were now watching her. She saw her grandmother, writing in her journal by candlelight, while shadows danced on the walls around her. "They have something to show you," said Patrick, his breathing becoming more labored. "Go with them, M.O. store. Learn what you need to learn." As if responding to his words, one of the banshees extended her translucent hand through the broken window. Sarah hesitated for a moment, but something inside her knew that this was her destiny. She touched the creature's hand and felt herself being pulled into a different reality. The world around her was transformed. She was still in her grandfather's room, but it was like seeing through a veil of mist. The walls seemed to breathe, and she could see threads of golden energy connecting all the objects. The three banshees now seemed more solid, more real. "Welcome to the in-between place," said one of them in Old Gaelic, which Sarah surprisingly understood. "Here, worlds touch, and secrets are revealed to those who can see." The creatures began to show Sarah how reality was much more complex than she had imagined. There were layers upon layers of existence, and the banshees navigated between them, keeping the balance and guiding the souls that needed to cross over. "Your gift is not just to hear our laments or to see us," explained another banshee. "It's understanding the web that connects all things. It's being a guardian of the balance between worlds." Through this new perception, Sarah could see the threads of life that connected her grandfather to the material world slowly unraveling, while other, brighter threads began to form, extending into the beyond. "His time is almost up," said the third banshee. "But before the passing happens, you need to fully accept your role. The gift is in your blood, but the choice to embrace it is yours." Sarah looked at her grandfather, who seemed to be sleeping peacefully in bed. In between, she could see a golden aura around him, pulsating like a heart. The memories of his entire life were there, shining like stars in a complex web of events and choices. "How can I be sure I'm ready?" asked Sarah, her voice echoing strangely in this altered reality. "The gift was already inside you from the beginning," replied the first banshee. "Every time you felt something you couldn't explain, every time you heard music in the wind or saw shadows dancing, it was your gift manifesting. Now is just the time to consciously accept what you have always been." Sarah closed her eyes, letting all the inexplicable memories of her life finally make sense. The silver comb in her hands pulsed with ancient energy, connecting her even more deeply with her legacy. When she opened her eyes again, she was back in her normal room, but her perception had changed forever. She could see the banshees clearly now, without needing the veil of the in-between place, and she understood their role with a clarity she had never had before. "Did you see what you needed to see?" asked Patrick, his voice getting weaker and weaker. "Yes, Grandpa," replied Sarah, holding his hand. "Now I understand what it means to be a guardian." The three banshees stood outside the window, their wails now forming a harmony that spoke of farewell and renewal. Sarah knew that she was witnessing not only the end of a life, but also the beginning of her true journey as the heir to an ancestral legacy. The night wore on as Sarah remained by her grandfather's side, watching his breathing become weaker and weaker. The three banshees continued their silent vigil, their ethereal bodies emanating a soft light that illuminated the room with shades of green and silver. Her grandmother's diary rested on her lap, its pages still revealing secrets she needed to absorb. "There's something else I need to tell you," Patrick whispered, his voice so low that Sarah had to lean in to hear him. "About your mother, about the night she left." Sarah felt her heart squeeze. That night had always been a painful mystery in her life, surrounded by unanswered questions and hazy memories. "Your mother didn't die by accident, as everyone thinks," Patrick continued, his eyes fixed on a distant point. "She chose to sacrifice herself to maintain the balance between the worlds. There was an ancient prophecy. Before he could finish, a stronger gust of wind blew through the room, making the curtains dance violently. A fourth banshee appeared, different from the others. Her dress was blood red, and her eyes glowed with an intensity that made Sarah instinctively recoil. "The Morrigan," murmured Patrick, recognizing the figure. "The Queen of Ghosts." The newcomer floated over to the bed, her movements as graceful as flowing water. The other banshees bowed their heads in respect, their wails turning into an ancient chant that Sarah recognized from her mother's stories. "Young guardian," spoke Morrigan, his voice reverberating not only in the air, but inside Sarah's own mind. "Your mother's sacrifice was not in vain. She was protecting something far more precious than her own life." Sarah gripped the silver comb tighter, feeling it vibrate in tune with the presence of the powerful entity. "What was she protecting?" "The seal between the worlds," replied Morrigan. "There are places in Ireland where the veil is thinner, where the barriers between reality and dream break down. Your family has always been guardians of one of these portals, hidden deep within this estate." Patrick coughed weakly, attracting everyone's attention. The circle of stones in the woods behind the house. Sarah, you need to. Rest now, noble guardian, interrupted Morgan, laying a spectral hand on Patrick's forehead. Your granddaughter will understand when the time comes. Sarah watched her grandfather relax under the entity's touch, his features softening. The other banshees began to move in a slow circle around the bed, their dresses and hair floating as if they were submerged. The stone circle, thought Sarah, remembering the place she had always been forbidden to visit as a child. Her mother always said it was dangerous, that there were ancient things sleeping there that shouldn't be disturbed. Morgan turned her attention to Sarah. The portal is weakening. Without a guardian, the barriers will begin to crumble. You must complete your initiation before it's too late. But how? I don't know what to do. I'm not ready. Knowledge is in your blood, replied Morgan. The comb will show you the way, and your grandmother's diary contains the necessary words. But it must be done tonight, during the moment between worlds. Sarah opened the diary, her hands trembling slightly. On the last pages, she found a ritual described in detail, written with an urgency that seemed to leap from the paper. It was an ancient ceremony, meant to seal the bond between a guardian and the forces she was meant to protect. You will have to choose, Morgan said, just as your mother chose. Power comes with a price, always. The room began to spin slightly around Sarah, the walls seeming to breathe with a life of their own. Through the broken window, she could see the moon rising in the sky, its silver light bathing the landscape in spectral hues. Patrick opened his eyes one last time, meeting his granddaughter's gaze. Emo Store, trust your heart. The O'Connor blood is strong in you. Sarah held her grandfather's hand, feeling it grow colder and colder. The banshees intensified their singing, creating a melody that seemed to weave through the very threads of reality. The Morgan remained motionless, her ancient eyes fixed on Sarah, waiting for her decision. I need to get to the stone circle, Sarah said at last, standing up. Now, before it's too late, we'll guide you, replied Morgan. But remember, once the ritual begins, it cannot be interrupted. The consequences would be devastating. Sarah leaned over and kissed her grandfather's forehead, feeling that it might be the last time she would see him alive. I love you, Grandpa. Rest in peace. Go, whispered Patrick. Do what needs to be done. I'll be here when you get back, one way or another. With the silver comb in one hand and the diary in the other, Sarah walked to the door. The banshees formed a silent procession behind her, their ethereal forms lighting the way. The Morgan floated ahead, guiding her to her destination. As she descended the stairs of the manor, Sarah could feel the weight of generations of O'Connor guardians on her shoulders. The moment of her true initiation had arrived, and with it, the revelation of the true sacrifice her mother had made so many years ago. The night awaited her, laden with secrets and ancient magic, and Sarah knew that when the sun rose again, nothing would ever be the same. The icy wind whipped Sarah's face as she made her way towards the stone circle, guided by Morgan and accompanied by the silent procession of banshees. The full moon illuminated the path through the ancient woods, its shadows dancing among the trees like restless spirits. As they approached the sacred site, Sarah could feel the ancient energy pulsing through the ground. The silver comb in her hands vibrated more and more strongly, responding to the proximity of the portal. The pages of her grandmother's diary rustled without wind, as if the words written there wanted to break free from the paper. The circle was erected by the first O'Connors who came to these lands, he explained to Morgan, his voice echoing in Sarah's mind. They recognized the power of the place and swore to protect it, establishing a lineage of guardians that endures to this day. The circle of stones finally revealed itself before them, 12 ancient monoliths arranged in a perfect pattern, each marked with Celtic symbols that seemed to glow under the moonlight. In the center, a 13th stone, smaller than the others, emerged from the ground like a finger pointing to the sky. This is where your mother made her choice, said Morgan, hovering over the central stone. The portal was unstable, threatening to tear the veil between the worlds. She offered her own life force to seal it again. Sarah felt hot tears streaming down her face as she finally understood the true meaning of her mother's sacrifice. The memories of that fateful night began to clear in her mind. The supernatural scream she had heard was not a harbinger of death, but the sound of the portal being sealed with blood and magic. "The seal is weakening again," continued Morgan. "Can you feel it?" Sarah could. There was a vibration in the air, a subtle dissonance that made her teeth ache. Through her new perception, she could see ethereal fissures in the very fabric of reality, slowly growing like cracks in glass. The banshees took up positions around the circle, their wailing turning into an ancient chant that made the stones themselves resonate in harmony. Sarah opened her grandmother's diary to the ritual page, the ancient words glowing like fire on the page. "Before you begin," she warned Morgan, "you must fully understand what is at stake. The portal needs a living guardian, anchored in both the material and spiritual worlds. If you accept this role, you will never be able to leave these lands again. You will be bound to this place until another guardian takes your place." Sarah thought about her life in Dublin, the plans she had made, the dreams she had nurtured. It all seemed so distant now, so insignificant in the face of the responsibility that lay before her. The silver comb pulsed in her hands, and through it, Sarah felt the presence of all the guardians who had come before her. Her mother, her grandmother, and all the other O'Connor women who had dedicated their lives to protecting the balance between the worlds. "I accept," Sarah said, her voice firm despite the fear she felt. With her hands trembling slightly, she began to read the words of the ritual, her voice blending with the singing of the banshees. The ancient Gaelic flowed from her lips as if she had spoken it all her life, each syllable charged with power and purpose. As the ritual progressed, Sarah could feel a change taking place inside her. It was as if every cell in her body was being rewritten, attuned to the ancient forces that permeated the stone circle. The silver comb in her hands began to glow with a light so intense that it seemed to be made of liquid stars. Morgan floated over to her, his eyes burning like coals. "The crucial moment is approaching. The portal must be sealed with blood and will." Sarah knew what she had to do. With the silver comb, she made a small cut in her palm, letting her blood drip onto the central stone. The drops seemed alive, snaking through the ancient symbols carved into the rock. A supernatural wind rose up, making Sarah's hair dance around her face. The cracks in reality began to close, sewn shut by the power of her voluntary sacrifice. Through her new perception, she could see the golden threads of energy intertwining, restoring the integrity of the veil between the worlds. It was then that she felt it, a familiar and beloved presence, so close that she could touch it. Her mother was there, not as a banshee, but as a soft, welcoming light that enveloped her. "You have chosen well, M.O. Store," whispered her mother's voice in her heart. The circle is complete once again. The ritual came to an end with one last verse spoken in unison by Sarah and the banshees. The light from the silver comb gradually dimmed, but Sarah could sense that something fundamental had changed. She was now connected not just to the circle of stones, but to the whole earth around her, every tree, every stone, every drop of dew. Morgan inclined her head in acknowledgement. "It is done. You are now the gatekeeper, Sarah O'Connor. May your vigil be long and your heart remain strong." The first lights of dawn were beginning to tint the horizon when Sarah felt it, the exact moment her grandfather left this world. The banshees raised their voices in a final lament, not of sadness, but a celebration for a life well lived and a duty fulfilled to the end. Sarah stood in the stone circle, feeling the weight and honor of her new role settle on her shoulders like a cloak. The silver comb, now an inseparable part of her being, gleamed softly in her hands, promising to guide her through the years and challenges to come. She was now the guardian, the protector, the bridge between worlds. And as the sun rose over the ancient O'Connor lands, Sarah knew she had found her true place, not just as the heir to an ancestral legacy, but as the continuer of a tradition that transcended time and death itself. The wind blew gently across the stone circle, carrying with it the echoes of ancient songs and renewed promises. As a new guardian, took up her post in the eternal vigil between the worlds. In a small village surrounded by a dense forest, with the smell of freshly baked bread hung in the air every morning, lived a 12-year-old girl known to everyone as Little Red Riding Hood. Her real name was Sophia, but ever since her grandmother had given her a beautiful handmade red cape, no one called her any different. The cape, sewn with love and dedication, had a hood so perfect that it seemed to have been tailor-made for her, and the little girl was rarely seen without her favorite garment. Helena, Little Riding Hood's mother, was a hard-working woman who had been running the village's only bakery on her own since she was widowed. Every morning, before the sun had even risen, she was already rolling up her sleeves, preparing dough, and baking the bread that fed the locals. The aroma emanating from her bakery was like a natural alarm clock for the whole village, and people said that just smelling it was enough to make the day start better. On that particular morning, which would later prove to be decisive in Little Riding Hood's life, the sky dawned with a different hue, more gray than usual, as if nature itself wanted to give her a warning. Helena was more worried than usual, as she had received news that her mother, Little Riding Hood's grandmother, was ill. The old lady lived alone on the other side of the forest, in a cozy little house about an hour's walk from the village. "Sophia, my dear," Helena called out, using her daughter's real name to demonstrate the seriousness of the moment. "Your grandmother isn't feeling well, and I need you to take this basket to her." The woman was carefully arranging in a wicker basket the freshest bread she had just baked, a jar of the purest honey she could find, and some medicinal herbs she used to grow in her small garden. Little Riding Hood, who was helping to organize the shelves in the bakery, approached with interest. Her green eyes, inherited from her father, sparkled with the expectation of an adventure, even if it was just a simple delivery. The girl loved visiting her grandmother, and the stories she told about ancient times always fascinated her. "But you have to promise me something," Helena continued, holding her daughter's hands tightly. "Under no circumstances must you deviate from the main path. The forest can be dangerous, especially for a little girl on her own." Her eyes conveyed genuine concern, a reflection of the rumors circulating around the village about strange creatures that had been spotted among the trees in recent weeks. The girl nodded solemnly, although in her young heart there was no room for such fear. After all, she knew that path like the back of her hand, having walked it countless times with her mother. "I promise, Mama. I'll go straight to Grandma's and be back before nightfall." However, there was something different in the air that morning. As Little Riding Hood prepared to leave, adjusting her red cloak and checking the content of her basket one last time, a pair of yellow eyes watched her from afar, hidden among the bushes that marked the beginning of the forest. It was Magnus, a wolf unlike any other that had ever inhabited these lands. His fur was as black as the darkest night, and his intelligence far surpassed that of his fellows. Magnus was no ordinary predator. He had learned to observe humans over the years, studying their habits and developing a unique ability to understand their language. His hunger was not just for meat, but for power and control. For months he had been planning something great, something that would forever change the balance between the forest dwellers and the villagers. When Little Riding Hood finally left, her red cape standing out against the green of the vegetation, Magnus felt that his opportunity had arrived. The girl represented everything he despised in human naivety: trust, innocence, and a sense of security that he considered foolish and unfounded. The path through the forest meandered between centuries-old trees, some so old that their tops intertwined at the top, creating a natural canopy that filtered the sunlight into dancing patterns on the leaf-covered ground. Little Riding Hood walked merrily along, occasionally pausing to admire a colorful flower or listen to the song of a particularly melodious bird. It was during one of these pauses that Magnus decided to make his approach. With silent, calculated steps, he emerged from behind a large tree, presenting himself not as the predator he was, but as a gentle forest dweller. His voice, when he spoke, was soft and melodious, completely different from the growl his species normally produced. "Good morning, little lady," he greeted, keeping a respectful distance. "What a beautiful red cape you have." His yellow eyes shone with a disturbing intelligence, But Little Riding Hood, in her innocence, saw only friendly curiosity in that gaze. The little girl, surprised but not frightened, responded to the greeting with the courtesy her mother had taught her. At that crucial moment, her mother's warnings seemed distant and hazy, as if they belonged to another world, a world where wolves didn't talk and flowers didn't dance in the breeze. What Little Riding Hood didn't realize was that this apparently chance encounter marked the beginning of a series of events that would test not only her courage and cunning, but also her ability to distinguish between appearances and reality. The forest, which had always been his safe playground, was about to reveal its darkest secrets, and the journey that had begun as a simple delivery would turn into an adventure that would forever change his understanding of trust, obedience, and the consequences of our choices. Magnus watched Little Riding Hood's every move carefully, noticing how she held the basket tightly against her chest. The aroma of fresh bread and honey reached his sensitive nostrils, but that wasn't what really interested him. There was something deeper to his plan, something that went beyond simply satisfying his hunger. "Where are you going in such a hurry, little one?" he asked, his velvety voice masking his true intentions. The wolf circled the girl at a calculated distance, his movements flowing like dark water. Little Riding Hood, still enchanted by the idea of a talking wolf, replied without hesitation, "I'm going to visit my grandmother who is ill. I'll bring fresh bread and honey so she can recover." Her words were full of pride in the mission her mother had entrusted her with. The wolf feigned genuine interest, his yellow eyes shining with false compassion. "What a devoted granddaughter you are, and where does your dear grandmother live?" As he spoke, Magnus was already mentally plotting the shortest route to the old woman's house. In a little house beyond the forest, next to the big oak tree, Little Riding Hood replied, completely forgetting her mother's warnings about talking to strangers. "It's the only house with red flowers in the window." Magnus suppressed a triumphant smile. "You know, little one," he said, his voice as melodious as a lullaby, "I noticed some beautiful flowers a little further on. I'm sure your grandmother would love a bouquet to brighten up her day of convalescence." The suggestion hit Little Riding Hood like a ray of sunshine through the clouds. "Really? How come I didn't think of that before?" she exclaimed, her green eyes shining with renewed enthusiasm. "The most beautiful ones are in that direction," said Magnus, pointing with his snout to a small clearing to the left of the main path. "They're rare flowers, which only bloom on special days like today." As Little Riding Hood was tempted to pick the flowers, a small voice in her mind tried to remind her of the promise she had made to her mother. But the idea of making her grandmother smile with a colorful bouquet seemed too strong to resist. "Maybe I can pick just a few," she muttered to herself, already turning off the main path. Magnus watched with satisfaction as the girl walked away, knowing that his plan was working perfectly. As soon as Little Riding Hood disappeared between the trees, the wolf quickly set off along the shortcut he knew so well. His paws barely touched the ground as he ran, moving with an agility that only years of experience in the forest could provide. Meanwhile, in the clearing, Little Riding Hood was discovering a veritable treasure trove of wild flowers. There were snow-white daisies, deep purple violets, and small yellow flowers that she had never seen before. Time seemed to flow differently in that place, as if nature itself was conspiring to make her forget her obligations. The girl didn't notice, but as she picked the flowers, small forest dwellers watched her with concern. One red squirrel in particular, called Redhead by the other animals, was well aware of Magnus' antics and tried, without success, to warn the girl of the danger. In the village, Helena began to feel an inexplicable restlessness. As she continued her work in the bakery, her thoughts constantly turned to her daughter. The clouds in the sky had darkened and a cold wind was beginning to blow between the houses. At his grandmother's house, Magnus was already approaching with silent footsteps. The smoke coming from the chimney indicated that the lady was at home, probably preparing her afternoon tea, as was her custom. The wolf adjusted his expression, rehearsing the sweetest voice he could produce. Riding Hood's grandmother, a white-haired lady with a kind face, was sitting in her rocking chair by the window, knitting yet another garment for her beloved granddaughter. The sound of soft knocks on the door surprised her, but didn't alarm her. After all, who could want to harm an old lady? "Who is it?" she asked, her voice weak from her illness. "It's me, Grandma, your granddaughter," Magnus replied, perfectly imitating the voice of Little Riding Hood. "I brought you some fresh bread and honey." The lady smiled, her heart warmed by her granddaughter's supposed visit. Without suspecting a thing, she got up to open the door, completely oblivious to the danger that awaited her on the other side. In the clearing, Little Riding Hood finally realized how much time had passed. The sun was no longer so high in the sky, and the shadows of the trees had become longer. With a jolt, she gathered up the flowers she had picked and set off again, hoping that her little distraction hadn't delayed her arrival too much. What she didn't know was that her decisions that day had triggered a series of events that would test not only her courage, but also her ability to right her own wrongs. The forest, which had always seemed so welcoming, was beginning to show its darkest face, and the road to her grandmother's house had never seemed so long and threatening. Red, the squirrel, followed the girl, jumping from branch to branch, determined not to lose sight of her. He knew that Magnus was no ordinary wolf, and that his intentions went far beyond a simple meal. There were old stories in the forest, stories about the true nature of this predator and the dark powers it possessed. The wind was blowing harder now, making Little Riding Hood's red cape dance around her like a warning flag. The dark clouds in the sky seemed to follow her path, as if the weather itself wanted to warn her of the danger that awaited her. As Little Riding Hood hurried back through the forest, events at her grandmother's house took a dark turn. Magnus, after gaining entry to the house, revealed his true nature. The old woman barely had time to scream before the wolf cornered her. However, instead of attacking her as an ordinary predator would, Magnus had other plans. "Don't worry, lady," he said, with a smile that showed his sharp teeth. "I don't intend to hurt you yet. I just need you to cooperate with me." With surprising agility, the wolf led Grandma to the large oak cupboard in the corner of the room and locked her in. "Stay still and wait. Your granddaughter is on her way, and I have a little surprise for her." The grandmother, although frightened, kept her dignity. "You don't know my granddaughter," she said through the closet door. "She's smarter than she looks." Magnus laughed, a guttural sound that echoed through the small house. "We'll see," he replied, as he began to rummage through the lady's room. He found one of her nightgowns and her traditional nightcap, putting them on with meticulous care. His plan depended on the smallest detail. Meanwhile, in the forest, Little Riding Hood was beginning to notice subtle changes in her surroundings. The wind whispered through the trees in a different way, and the shadows seemed to move in strange ways. Red, the squirrel, continued to follow her, desperately looking for a way to warn her of the danger. It was then that the girl came across Sarah, a young woodcutter who often worked in that part of the forest. Sarah was gathering up her work tools, preparing to return home because of the worsening weather. "Little Riding Hood, what are you doing alone in the woods at this hour?" asked Sarah, her brow furrowed with concern. She knew all about the dangers in these parts. "I'm going to visit my grandmother," replied the girl, showing her basket. "She's sick, and Mom asked me to bring some groceries." Sarah looked up at the darkening sky and at the slightly wilted flowers in Little Riding Hood's hand. "You stray from the main path, haven't you?" Her voice was not one of accusation, but of genuine concern. Little Riding Hood blushed, nodding slightly. "Just for a moment, to pick these flowers. A very kind wolf showed me where to find them." Sarah's face paled. "A wolf? Did you talk to Magnus?" Seeing the girl's confused expression, the woodcutter continued. "There are stories about him, Little Riding Hood. Old, scary stories. He's no ordinary wolf." Redhead, realizing that at last someone could help, began making frantic signs, jumping from branch to branch and crying loudly. Sarah, who had spent her life in the forest, immediately understood that something was wrong. "We need to hurry," she said, picking up her axe. "Your grandmother could be in danger." Meanwhile, at his grandmother's house, Magnus had finished his preparations. Lying on the bed in his lady's nightgown and bonnet, he waited patiently. His yellow eyes shone in the dimness of the room, fixed on the door. Occasionally, small sounds came from the closet, which he silenced with a low growl. Little Hats and Sarah moved quickly through the forest, with the woodcutter leading the way along an alternative path she knew well. Magnus has plagued this forest for longer than anyone can remember, Sarah explained as they walked. He's not just a predator. They say he's made a pact with ancient, dark forces in the forest. The girl felt her heart racing with every step. The guilt of having disobeyed her mother weighed heavily on her shoulders. But now her concern was entirely focused on her grandmother. Red continued to accompany them, occasionally running ahead to check the path. The little squirrel knew that time was of the essence. He had witnessed other Magnus ploys in the past and knew all the terrible fate that awaited those who fell into his traps. But why would he do that? Asked Little Riding Hood, her voice trembling slightly. Why deceive a little girl and her grandmother? Sarah sighed heavily as they dodged a fallen log. Magnus believes that by controlling humans, he can control the forest. Every person he deceives, every life he destroys, increases his power over these lands. The clouds above them grew darker and darker, and distant thunder began to sound. The forest seemed to respond to the tension of the moment, with the branches of the trees moving more agitatedly and the birds silencing their songs. Finally, they spotted the smoke from the chimney of their grandmother's house between the trees. Sarah signaled for them to stop. "We need to be careful," she whispered. "Magnus is cunning and dangerous. We can't just barge in. We need a plan." At that moment, Red began to make more urgent signals, pointing to a small window on the side of the house. Through it, they could see movement inside the room, a large, dark shape lying on his grandmother's bed. "He's in there," whispered Little Riding Hood, her face pale with worry. "What about my grandmother?" Sarah studied the situation with experienced eyes. Years of living in the forest had taught her to think quickly in dangerous situations. "First, we need to find out where your grandmother is. Then we need to get Magnus out of that house." The two looked at each other, knowing that what came next would require all their courage and cunning. The storm was approaching, and with it, the decisive moment of their confrontation with the wolf of the forest. Sarah and Chapeau silently approached the house, while Redhead continued his vigilant watch on the nearby branches. The woodcutter, with years of experience in dealing with dangerous situations in the forest, began to draw up a plan. "Did you notice that little sound coming from the closet?" whispered Sarah, her eyes attentive to every movement inside the house. "I bet your grandmother is locked in there." Magnus has always been more interested in mind games than direct violence. Chapeau nodded, feeling a mixture of relief that her grandmother was alive and guilt for having caused the whole situation. How can we help her without Magnus noticing? Sarah thought for a moment, looking at the axe in her hands. "We need a distraction, something that will force Magnus out of the house, if only for a few minutes." It was then that Red began to make more animated signs, jumping between branches and pointing to other forest animals that were beginning to gather nearby. There were squirrels, rabbits, and even a few birds, all apparently responding to some kind of silent call from the little red squirrel. "That's it," exclaimed Sarah in an excited whisper. "The forest animals can help us. Magnus may be powerful, but even he has limits." Quickly, Sarah and Little Riding Hood began to organize their plan with the help of the forest animals. The rabbits would start by digging strategic holes around the house, while the birds would create a noisy distraction. The squirrels, led by Redhead, would be responsible for a series of small provocations aimed at the wolves. "When Magnus leaves to investigate the commotion," Sarah explained, "I'll go in through the back door to free your grandmother. You, Little Riding Hood, will stay here with Redhead, ready to run if anything goes wrong." The little girl immediately protested. "But I want to help. It's my fault this happened." Sarah put a gentle hand on Little Riding Hood's shoulder. "You're already helping. Besides, if anything goes wrong, we'll need someone to run to the village and get more help." As the animals got into position, the sky continued to darken and the first raindrops began to fall. The timing would have to be perfect. Sarah knew that Magnus was too clever to fall for an obvious trick, but she also knew that even the most intelligent of predators could be outwitted when faced with multiple threats simultaneously. Inside the house, Magnus was starting to get impatient. He could sense that something was different in the air, apart from the approaching storm. The small sounds coming from outside the house, scratching of small paws, flapping wings, branches moving unnaturally, were beginning to irritate him. His grandmother, still locked in the closet, was also noticing the change in atmosphere. Years of living in the forest had taught her to recognize when something extraordinary was about to happen. She remained silent, but her heart was full of hope. "Now," signaled Sarah, and the plan was put into action. First, the birds began a deafening chorus, very different from their usual songs. It was a shrill, disturbing sound that echoed throughout the clearing. Simultaneously, the rabbits began hopping and tapping their paws on the ground in a frenetic rhythm, creating a vibration that could be felt inside the house. Magnus got out of bed, his instincts warning him of the danger. As he approached the window to investigate, Red and his fellow squirrels began their attack, throwing small nuts and sticks against the glass. The wolf growled in frustration. He knew something was wrong, but his pride wouldn't allow him to ignore such an affront to his territory. After a moment's hesitation, he decided that he needed to show those insolent creatures who really ran the forest. As soon as Magnus opened the front door, the animals stepped up their performance. The birds dived towards him, forcing him to dodge constantly, while the rabbits jumped between his feet, confusing his movements. Sarah seized the opportunity and, moving like a shadow, slipped through to the back door. With skill acquired from years of working in the forest, she managed to open it without making a sound. Inside the house, she quickly located the cupboard and, using her axe with surgical precision, managed to break the lock. Chapeau's grandmother emerged, pale but determined. "We need to get out of here," Sarah whispered, supporting the old woman. Outside, the situation was becoming increasingly chaotic. Magnus, enraged by the animal's attack, was beginning to show his true nature. His eyes glowed with a supernatural fire, and his form seemed to grow and distort in the shadows of the approaching storm. Little Riding Hood watched everything from her hiding place, her heart beating fast as she saw Sarah and her grandmother emerge discreetly through the back door. The plan was working, but something about Magnus' behavior worried her. The wolf didn't just look furious. There was something else, something dangerous and ancient awakening in his eyes. "Do you think you can fool me?" roared Magnus, his voice now very different from the seductive melody he had used before. "I am the lord of this forest. I am the very darkness among the trees." The storm finally burst upon them, bringing with it lightning that illuminated the scene ghostly. Sarah, her grandmother, and Little Riding Hood quickly gathered at the edge of the clearing, ready to flee, but they knew the night was far from over. Magnus turned towards them, his eyes meeting those of Little Riding Hood. At that moment, the girl understood that her adventure was about to reach its climax, and that the true consequences of her disobedience were only just beginning to unfold. Magnus' roar echoed across the clearing, mixing with the thunder of the storm. The rain was falling heavily now, turning the forest floor into slippery mud. Little Riding Hood, Sarah, and her grandmother stood together, while the forest animals continued their coordinated distraction. "You don't understand the true power of this forest, child," said Magnus, his voice carrying a supernatural echo. "For centuries, I've watched humans invade this territory, building their villages, cutting down trees, claiming that this land belonged to them." Sarah positioned herself protectively in front of Little Riding Hood and her grandmother, her axe firmly in her hands. "And you think terrorizing a little girl and an old lady is going to change that?" she challenged. A cruel smile formed on the wolf's muzzle. "Every soul I bend to will strengthens my hold on this forest. Every heart I corrupt with fear feeds my power." It was then that Little Riding Hood stepped forward, surprising everyone. The rain soaked her red cloak, but her green eyes shone with a newfound determination. "You're wrong," she said, her voice clear and firm despite the storm. "The forest doesn't belong to anyone. Not to us. Not to you." Red and the other animals approached Little Riding Hood, forming a makeshift line of defense. The little red squirrel climbed onto the girl's shoulder, as if to show his support. Magnus growled, his form growing even larger in the shadows of the storm. "Silly child, do you think a few animals can stop me?" "It's not just a few animals," Grandma intervened, her voice weak but determined. It's the forest itself that's turned against you, Magnus. Your greed and cruelty go against everything these lands stand for." As if responding to the lady's words, a strong wind began to blow, making the trees groan and bend. Leaves and branches were torn off, dancing in the air like a magical whirlwind. Sarah realized what was happening before anyone else. "The forest is awakening," she whispered, lowering her axe. The old stories were true. Magnus also sensed the change in the air, and for the first time, a flash of fear crossed his yellow eyes. The power he held so dear was beginning to slip from his grasp like water between his fingers. "No," he roared, advancing towards Little Riding Hood. "I won't let a child destroy everything I've built." But before he could reach her, roots emerged from the soggy ground, entwining around her paws. The animals of the forest, now in even greater numbers, surrounded the wolf, each contributing in their own way to stop it. Little Riding Hood felt a strange energy flowing through her, as if the forest itself was using her as a channel. Her red cape fluttered in the wind, no longer just a piece of fabric, but a symbol of something greater. "The forest doesn't need a lord," she declared, her voice blending in with the sound of the storm. "It needs guardians who respect and protect it." Little Riding Hood's words seemed to awaken something ancient in the heart of the forest. The trees began to move, their roots and branches enveloping Magnus more and more. The wolf struggled and growled, but for the first time in centuries, he encountered a power greater than his own. "This isn't possible," he shouted, as his body began to be absorbed by the very earth he had so longed to control. "I am darkness. I am terror. You're just part of the forest," Sarah replied, "just like the rest of us. And now it has decided that its time is up." With a final howl of fury and despair, Magnus was completely enveloped by the roots and disappeared into the earth. The storm began to subside, and the first rays of sunlight penetrated through the clouds, illuminating the clearing with a golden light. Little Riding Hood ran to hug her grandmother, tears of relief streaming down her face. "I'm sorry for disobeying you, for putting everyone in danger." She smiled gently, stroking her granddaughter's hair. "Sometimes we need to make mistakes to learn the most important lessons. You showed great courage today, my dear." Sarah watched the scene with a smile as the forest animals began to disperse peacefully. Red stayed close by, as if to make sure that everything was really all right. "The forest chose you, Little Riding Hood," said the woodcutter. "Not as a mistress or dominatrix, but as a guardian. Someone who understands that respect and harmony are more powerful than fear and control." In the days that followed, the story of what happened in that clearing spread through the village. The forest seemed more alive and welcoming than ever, and the villagers learned to treat it with more respect. Little Riding Hood continued to visit her grandmother regularly, but now she was always accompanied by Redhead and other forest friends. Her red cape became not just a piece of clothing, but a symbol of protection and harmony between the villagers and the nature that surrounded them. The little girl never forgot the lesson she had learned that day, that true strength lies not in dominating or controlling, but in respecting and protecting what we love. And so peace returned to the forest, not through the fear that Magnus had tried to spread, but through the love and understanding that Little Riding Hood had shown. And when people asked about the forest wolf, the elders just smiled and said that it had become part of the ancient trees, an eternal reminder that nature always finds its own balance. In 19th century London, where the smoke from the chimneys danced against the grey sky and the cobbled streets echoed with the sounds of carriages, the Darling family lived in a modest but cozy house. Winnie Darling, a 12-year-old girl with bright eyes and an even brighter imagination, shared a room with her younger brothers. John, a 10-year-old who dreamed of pirate adventures, and Michael, the 6-year-old who still cuddled his teddy bear every night. Mrs. Darling was a loving mother who every night carefully stored her children's dreams in little imaginary drawers in their minds, while telling them stories before bed. Mr. Darling, although somewhat strict with finances and concerned with appearances, had a kind heart hidden beneath his austere exterior. The family also had Nana, a devoted Saint Bernard dog who served as the children's nanny, an unusual arrangement that often embarrassed Mr. Darling in front of the neighbors. One particularly starry night, while Mrs. Darling was putting the children to bed, she noticed a strange shadow dancing in the room. It was no ordinary shadow. It seemed to have a life of its own, and even more curiously, it didn't belong to anyone in the room. When she tried to catch it, it flew out of the window like a frightened bird. Mrs. Darling held this event close to her heart, worried about what it might mean. The stories Winnie told her brothers every night were full of pirates, fairies, and extraordinary adventures. She had a special gift for storytelling, transforming the children's rooms into pirate ships, enchanted forests, and mysterious caves through her words. John and Michael hung on every word, their eyes wide with excitement as their imaginations flew to faraway, magical places. It was on one of these evenings, when their parents had gone out for an important dinner, that something extraordinary happened. A golden glow, no bigger than a butterfly, came through the bedroom window, followed by a boy dressed in leaves and vines. He floated in the air as if gravity were just a polite suggestion that he preferred to ignore. His name was Peter Pan, and he was looking for something. "My shadow," he exclaimed, scanning the corners of the room. "Have you seen her around?" Wendy, who was only pretending to sleep, sat up in bed amazed. The boy didn't look much older than her, but there was something in his eyes, a mixture of wild joy and ancient loneliness, that made him unlike anyone she had ever met. The little golden light that accompanied him was Tinker Bell, a fairy with a strong temper and even stronger jealousy. She tinkled furiously when she saw Peter's interest in Wendy, although only he seemed to understand her language of bells. When Wendy found the shadow tucked away in her mother's drawer and helped Peter sew it back on, after a few unsuccessful attempts by him to glue it on with soap, an instant friendship was formed. Peter told them about Neverland, a place where children never grew up, where there were adventures every day, and where he led a group of lost boys, children who had fallen out of their baby carriages and were never reclaimed. "Why don't you come with me?" Peter asked, hovering in the air with a mischievous grin. "You can tell stories to the lost boys, and your brothers can join in our adventures." The offer was tempting. Winnie looked at her brothers, who were already awake and excited at the possibility. The idea of never having to grow up, of living in a place where adventure was always lurking, was irresistible to children. But there were dangers in Neverland that Peter mentioned casually, as if they were part of the fun. Captain Hook and his pirates, who swore revenge on Peter after he cut off the captain's hand and threw it to a crocodile. The same crocodile that now followed Hook everywhere, having developed a particular taste for pirates and a ticking clock in his stomach. There were also the Indians from Tiger Lily's tribe, the mermaids with their enchanting voices and whimsical personalities, and the fairies who, as Tinker Bell clearly demonstrated, could be as temperamental as they were beautiful. "But how will we get there?" asked John, adjusting his glasses enthusiastically. "By flying, of course," replied Peter, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "All it takes is a happy thought and a little fairy dust." Tinker Bell, still annoyed, was persuaded to share her magic dust with the children. Soon, Wendy, John, and Michael discovered that they could float, first clumsily, banging against the ceiling, then more gracefully as they learned to control their direction. The decision was made in a moment of pure childish magic and excitement. Worries about their parents, growing up, and the responsibilities of the adult world seemed distant and unimportant in the face of the promise of eternal adventure. As the children followed Peter out of the window, climbing higher and higher in the London's night sky, they left behind not only their home, but also the ordered and predictable world of the Victorian era. Ahead of them was the second star on the right, shining like a beacon to Neverland, where time worked differently and adventure awaited around every corner. What they didn't know was that this impulsive decision would lead them to discoveries about themselves, the value of family, and the true meaning of growing up. Lessons none of them expected to learn when they left the comfort of their rooms that starry night. The journey to Neverland was an experience the darling children would never forget. Flying above the clouds, following Peter Pan through the starry sky, they discovered a completely new world. The air became thinner and shinier as they approached the second star on the right, and a magical sensation overtook their bodies. Michael clutched his teddy bear tightly as he flew, occasionally letting out squeals of delight as he plunged through the soft clouds. John maintained a posture that tried to look serious, like an explorer on an important expedition, but his eyes sparkled with excitement at each new discovery. Wendy, for her part, watched Peter with fascination, noticing how he seemed perfectly at ease in the air, as if he had been born to fly. Tinker Bell continued to show her displeasure, flying ahead of the group and occasionally casting annoyed glances at Wendy. Her golden glow flashed more brightly when Peter approached her to help her with some stronger air currents. "It's just over there," announced Peter, pointing to a bright spot on the horizon. As they got closer, Neverland began to take shape before their amazed eyes. It was an island that seemed to have been plucked straight out of children's most fantastic dreams. Snow-capped mountains on one side, golden beaches on the other, a dense rainforest in the center, and a crystal-clear lagoon where mermaids swam lazily. Anchored in a cove was Captain Hook's imposing pirate ship, the Jolly Roger, its black sails fluttering ominously in the wind. In the forest, smoke rose in spirals from the teepees of the indigenous tribe, and small points of light indicated where the fairies lived among the trees. Peter led the children to their secret hiding place, a hollow tree that served as the entrance to the Lost Boys' underground house. Before entering, however, they had to quickly hide behind some rocks. A group of pirates were patrolling the area. "That's Mr. Smee," whispered Peter, pointing to a short, pudgy pirate with round glasses. "He's Captain Hook's first mate. He's not very bright, but he's loyal to the captain." The pirates went on muttering about looking for Peter Pan and his new shadow, not realizing that the object of their search was only a few meters away, holding back their laughter along with their new friends. When the way was clear, Peter led them to the secret entrance. Each child went down a different natural slide, landing on soft cushions made of leaves and feathers. Inside the hideout, 6 boys of varying ages, all dressed in animal skins and makeshift clothes, welcomed the visitors with a mixture of curiosity and enthusiasm. "Lost Boys, meet Wendy, John, and Michael," announced Peter proudly. "Wendy will be our new mother, and she'll tell us stories every night." The Lost Boys, Lightly, Toodles, Nibs, Curly, and the twins, immediately surrounded Wendy with requests for stories and questions about what it was like to have a real mother. John was quickly embroiled in a discussion about pirate combat tactics, while Michael found a cozy corner to sit with his teddy bear, watching everything with wide eyes. The underground house was an extraordinary place, decorated with treasures found all over the island. Colorful mermaid shells, exotic feathers from birds never seen before, hand-drawn maps showing secret hiding places, and even some jewels borrowed from the pirates. Wendy, naturally taking on the maternal role that Peter had assigned her, began to organize things. She noticed that the boys needed a bath, their clothes needed mending, and the place needed a good clean. But before she could begin any of these tasks, a distant sound caught everyone's attention. Tick-tick. The Lost Boys were instantly on alert. "It's the crocodile," explained Nibs in an excited whisper. "It must be chasing Captain Hook again." Peter flew to one of the secret windows of the hideout and confirmed it. The fearsome Captain Hook was running along the beach, his red coat fluttering in the wind, while the huge crocodile chased him with a hungry expression. The sound of the clock in his stomach echoed around the island, serving as a constant warning to the captain. "Why don't we take advantage of him being distracted to explore the ship?" suggested Peter with a mischievous grin. The idea was met with shouts of approval from the Lost Boys and a worried look from Wendy. "Isn't it dangerous?" she asked, thinking of her younger brothers. "Everything's an adventure in Neverland," replied Peter, already floating towards the exit. "Besides, you still have a lot of fairy dust on you. If anything goes wrong, you can just fly away." And so, before Wendy could protest further, the whole group was on their way to the Jolly Roger, flying low over the waters of the Mermaid Lagoon. The aquatic creatures raised their heads to watch them pass, their colorful hair glistening in the sun, but there was something about their smiles that made Wendy shudder. They didn't look entirely friendly. As they approached the pirate ship, the sun began to set on Neverland, painting the sky with impossible colors and casting long shadows over the water. The adventure that awaited them was only the beginning of a series of events that would test not only their courage, but also the bonds they were beginning to form in this magical place where time stood still and children never had to grow up. Or so they thought. As they approached the Jolly Raja, Peter signaled for everyone to remain silent. The pirate ship was even more impressive up close, with its black sails and elaborate carvings in the dark wood. Most of the crew had left in search of the captain, leaving only a few sleepy pirates standing guard on deck. Peter, an expert at mischief, led the group to Captain Hook's cabin. The place was luxurious, decorated with maps, treasures, and an impressive collection of redcoats. In the center was a table with a detailed map of Neverland, marked with mysterious X's and annotations in the captain's elaborate handwriting. "Look at this," whispered John, adjusting his glasses as he examined a golden compass on the table. Michael, for his part, was fascinated by a small globe that rotated magically, showing lands that didn't even exist on ordinary maps. When he noticed something different, a half-open diary on the captain's desk. Curious, she approached it and began to read a few passages. To her surprise, she discovered that Hook hadn't always been a cruel pirate. Years ago, he had been a respected explorer, transformed by bitterness after his fateful encounter with Peter Pan. Meanwhile, the Lost Boys rummaged through drawers and chests, finding all kinds of treasure. Tinker Bell flew around, her golden light illuminating dark corners of the cabin, although she still cast suspicious glances at Wendy. Suddenly, they heard voices approaching. "The captain's coming back," warned Curly, one of the Lost Boys, his eyes wide with fear. "Quick, hide," ordered Peter, as the children looked for places to hide. Wendy, John and Michael hid behind a heavy curtain, while the Lost Boys squeezed inside an empty truck. Peter floated up to the ceiling, blending into the shadows, and Tinker Bell hid inside a lantern. Captain Hook entered his cabin, panting and irritated after yet another crocodile chase. His long black hair was disheveled, and his metal hook glinted menacingly in the light of the lanterns. Mr. Smee followed him closely, trying to calm him down. "That damned reptile," shouted Hook, throwing his hat on the table. "And all because of that pestilent Peter Pan. Oh, if I could only get my hand on him." "Calm down, Captain," tried Smee, pouring himself a cup of tea. "You need some rest, sir. How about some music on your harpsichord?" Hook sat down heavily in his chair, but something caught his eye. "Smee," he said slowly, "did you go through my things?" Winnie's heart raced. The compass that John had examined was out of place, and some drawers weren't completely closed. "No, Captain, don't even go near your things, not me," replied Smee, confused. Hook stood up, his shrewd eyes scanning the cabin. "So we have visitors," he muttered, a cruel smile forming on his lips. "And I bet I know exactly who they are." The captain began to walk around the cabin, banging his hook against furniture and walls. As he approached the curtain where Wendy and her brothers were hiding, Michael couldn't hold back a sneeze. "Whoa!" exclaimed Hook, pulling back the curtain. At that moment, Peter Pan descended from the ceiling like a bolt of lightning, kicking off the captain's hat. "Now," he shouted, and chaos ensued in the cabin. The Lost Boys jumped out of the trunk, throwing objects and making a mess. Tinker Bell flew in circles around Smee's head, disorientating him. Wendy, John and Michael took advantage of the distraction to run to the cabin window. "Happy thought," reminded Peter, as he threw more fairy dust at them. The children began to float away, escaping through the window one by one. Hook, furious, tried to reach them with his hook. "Come back here, you little pests." "Smee, call the crew." Peter was the last to leave, but not without one last taunt. He took the captain's favorite hat and placed it on his own head, bowing mockingly. "See you later, old man," he laughed, flying out the window. The escape was exciting, with the children flying in zigzags to dodge the shots of the pirates who had climbed onto the deck. The cannonballs exploded in the water around them, creating big splashes that got them wet, but nobody cared. They were all laughing at the adventure. When they finally reached their hiding place, they fell to the ground laughing and panting. John was still holding the compass he had borrowed from the captain, and Michael was hugging his teddy bear that had almost been left behind in the confusion. "That was incredible," exclaimed Nibs, jumping up and down with excitement. Wendy, although she also found the adventure exciting, couldn't stop thinking about the captain's diary. There was more to Huck than met the eye, and she wondered if Peter knew the whole story. Night fell in Neverland, and the children gathered around a makeshift fire inside the hideout. Wendy began to tell stories, but this time she included one about a man who had lost his way and turned into something he had never planned to be. Peter watched from his special chair, made of intertwined branches, but his gaze was distant, as if he too was lost in thought about the past, or perhaps about the future he refused to have. The sound of the crocodile's clock echoed in the distance, mingling with the singing of mermaids and the tinkling of fairies, creating the nocturnal symphony characteristic of Neverland. As the children began to fall asleep, no one noticed a shadowy figure watching the hideout from afar through a telescope. Captain Hook had found his hideout, and a plan was beginning to form in his vengeful mind. The next morning, the hideout was bustling with preparations for a big treasure hunt that Peter had planned. He had discovered an old map in one of Captain Hook's trunks during his raid on the ship, and was eager to share the adventure with everyone. Wendy was organizing provisions for the journey, preparing small parcels with fruit and bread that the lost boys had borrowed from the Indian village. John studied the compass stolen from the pirate ship, determined to be the expedition's official navigator, while Michael helped the twins tie ropes and prepare makeshift backpacks with large sheets of paper. "The treasure is hidden beyond Skull Rock," explained Peter, pointing to the worn map. "We'll have to pass through Mermaid Lagoon and cross Indian territory." Tinker Bell hovered over the map, her golden glow revealing secret markings that could only be seen with fairy light. She still maintained her protective attitude towards Peter, but had begun to tolerate Wendy's presence a little more, especially after the girl had sewn a little petal dress for her. The group set off at sunrise, with Peter leading the way through the air. The children alternated between flying and walking, saving the remaining fairy dust on their clothes. The first stop would be the Mermaid Lagoon, where they would need to get a special pearl which, according to the map, was necessary to open the treasure chest. As they approached the lagoon, the group hid behind some rocks to watch the mermaids. They were beautiful creatures, but Winnie had already realized that their beauty hid a dangerous nature. The mermaids played with each other, combing their long, colorful hair with combs made of coral and singing mesmerizing melodies. "I'm going," whispered Wendy, surprising everyone. "They're more hostile towards boys, but maybe I can negotiate with them." Peter hesitated, but nodded, respecting Wendy's courage. She approached the water's edge, and the mermaids immediately noticed her. One of them, with aqua green hair and a crown of shells, swam closer. "An earth girl," said the mermaid, her voice melodious but with a tone of disdain. "What do you want in our domain?" Wendy explained about the pearl, and to her surprise, the mermaids laughed. "Ah, yes, the magic pearl," said the crown mermaid. "We can give it to you, but it comes at a price. We want to hear a story we've never heard before." Wendy smiled, for storytelling was her specialty. She began to tell a tale about a young mermaid who fell in love with a human prince, a story she had read at home before coming to Neverland. The mermaids were completely fascinated, having never heard a story about one of their kind. Enchanted by the narrative, they gave Wendy the pearl, a luminescent jewel that seemed to contain moonlight itself inside. With the first part of their mission accomplished, the group headed towards the Indians' territory. On the way, however, they began to notice strange signs. Unnaturally broken branches, footprints that didn't belong to the island's animals, and an unsettling silence in the forest. Peter, his senses sharpened by life in Neverland, realized that something was wrong. "It's a trap," he whispered, signaling for everyone to stop. "Hook followed us here." He had barely finished speaking when nets fell over them, and pirates sprang up on all sides. Captain Hook emerged from the shadows, his hook glinting menacingly. Well, he smiled mischievously. "Looks like my little plan worked perfectly. Did you really believe that map had been stolen? I'll let you find it." The children struggled in their hammocks while Tinker Bell flew around frantically, trying to find a way to help. Peter managed to free himself with his dagger, but before he could help the others, he had to fend off Hook's attacks. "This time, Pan, there's no escape," shouted the captain, engaging Peter in a sword duel. Wendy, remaining calm, realized that she still had the mermaid pearl in her pocket. Remembering the stories her mother used to tell her about magical objects, she squeezed the pearl tightly and made a wish. To everyone's amazement, the pearl began to shine brightly, and its glow attracted the attention of the nearby mermaids. The aquatic creatures, feeling connected to their magical pearl, emerged from the lagoon and began to sing. Their music was different now, not to attract but to confuse and disorient the pirates. The sailors, affected by the melody, began to stagger and drop their weapons, giving the children a chance to free themselves from the nets. Even Captain Hook seemed momentarily stunned, allowing Peter to gain the upper hand in the duel. "Now," shouted Peter, and all those who still had enough fairy dust took off. Those who couldn't fly were carried by the others, forming a curious aerial chain that moved quickly away from danger. Huck, recovering from the effect of the siren's music, shouted orders to his disoriented crew, but it was too late. The group was far enough away, although they could hear the captain's furious shouts echoing across the island. They landed in a safe clearing, all panting but laughing at the adventure and danger they had just escaped. Wendy held the pearl with even more affection now, realizing that its magic was more powerful than they had imagined. "You were amazing," Peter exclaimed to Wendy, with a genuine admiration that made Tinker Bell tinkle with renewed jealousy. But the adventure wasn't over yet. The map, although it had been Hook's trap, had revealed something real through Tinker Bell's light. Ancient markings that indicated a real treasure, one that Captain Hook himself didn't know about. As the sun began to set on Neverland, the group prepared for the next stage of their adventure. Now, with the magic pearl in their possession and knowledge of the map's true markings, they were closer than ever to discovering one of the island's greatest secrets. With the secret map markings revealed by Tinker Bell's light, the group headed towards the snowy mountains of Neverland. The real treasure, according to ancient inscriptions, was hidden in a cave near the highest peak. Peter led the way, occasionally stopping to help the others climb more difficult sections. "It's colder up here," observed Michael, hugging his teddy bear tighter. Wendy, ever attentive, improvised scarves with large, soft leaves they had brought from the forest. As they climbed, the tropical vegetation gave way to rocks covered in snow and ice. The magical pearl in Wendy's possession emitted a soft glow that seemed more intense as they neared the top, as if responding to the proximity of something equally magical. John, consulting the stolen compass, noticed something strange. "The needle is spinning nonstop," he said, frowning, as if there was some kind of powerful magnetic force nearby. The Lost Boys, who would normally be the first to complain after a long walk, were unusually quiet and determined. There was something in the air, a feeling that they were about to discover something truly extraordinary. When they finally reached the entrance to the cave indicated on the map, they were greeted by an astonishing sight. Crystals of every possible color grew from the walls, creating a spectacle of light and color as Tinker Bell flew between them. In the center of the cave, there was an ice pedestal with an ancient chest. "That's it," exclaimed Peter, flying up to the pedestal. But when he tried to open the chest, he discovered that it was sealed by some kind of ancient magic. "The pearl," reminded Wendy. "That must be why we needed it." When Wendy brought the pearl close to the lock on the chest, something extraordinary happened. The crystals in the cave began to pulsate with a light of their own, and an ethereal voice filled the room. To open this true treasure, everyone must offer something precious, not of material value, but from the heart. The children looked at each other, confused at first, but gradually understanding the meaning of those words. One by one, they began to make their offerings. Michael was the first, placing his beloved teddy bear on the pedestal. John offered the compass, not for the object itself, but for what it represented, his search for direction and knowledge. The Lost Boys offered small mementos they kept from their lives before Neverland. A shiny button, a faded photo, a small spinning top. Wendy hesitated for a moment before offering something she always carried with her. A small thimble her mother had given her, a symbol of the family love she had left behind. Tinker Bell, surprising everyone, offered some of her own fairy scales, which shone like shooting stars. Peter Pan was the last. He hovered over the pedestal, struggling internally with something that seemed difficult to express. Finally, he took from his neck a necklace made of simple cord, from which hung a small rusty key. "It's the key to my house," he explained, his voice trembling slightly. "The house I left so long ago, when I decided never to grow up. When the last offering was made, the whole cave began to glow, and the chest slowly opened. Inside, there was no gold or jewels, but something much more valuable: memories. Memories crystallized in the form of light, showing precious moments in the lives of each one of them. They saw their families, their homes, moments of joy, and even sadness that they had forgotten or chosen to ignore. For the lost boys, it was the first time in years that they could clearly remember where they came from. For Wendy, John, and Michael, it was a painful but necessary reminder of the love they had left behind. Peter watched everything with an expression that mixed fascination and fear. For the first time, he could clearly see his own memories. A mother waiting with the window open, night after night, waiting for the return of the son who had chosen to fly away. It was at that moment that a familiar sound broke the spell of the moment. The clang of swords and pirate shouts echoing across the mountain. Captain Hook had followed in their footsteps in the snow. "He never gives up," sighed Nibs, preparing for another fight. But something had changed. The memories they had witnessed brought new understanding, especially for Wendy. She remembered Hook's diary, the words that revealed a lost man, not unlike the children who refused to grow up. "Wait," she said, holding Peter's arm as he drew his dagger. Maybe there's another way." When Hook and his men burst into the cave, they found not a group in battle position, but children standing around a chest of lights. Wendy stepped forward, holding the mermaid pearl. "Captain," she called, "there's something you need to see." The light of memories enveloped Hook, showing him not only his past as a respected explorer, but also the exact moment when he let bitterness transform his heart. It was a choice he had made, just as Peter had chosen never to grow up, just as each of them had made their own choices. Neverland, they finally understood, was not just a place to escape from growing up, but a place to understand that growing up didn't mean losing magic. It meant learning to carry it in a new way. The last lights of the day penetrated the cave entrance, painting everyone in golden hues. At that moment, suspended between childhood and what was to come, each of them faced a choice: to remain forever in the shadows of what they had been, or to take a step towards what they could become. And so, in Neverland, where time worked in mysterious ways and magic was in every breath, a new story began to be written. No longer about never growing up, but about growing up in the right way, carrying with them the precious memories of childhood like a treasure more valuable than all the pirates' gold. In a distant kingdom, where magic still danced freely among the ancient trees and wishes had the power to change destinies, lived a couple in a small house on the edge of the forest. Anna and Thomas, married for 10 years, shared a dream that seemed more and more distant: to have a child. Every night, Anna watched the stars through the window of their modest kitchen, whispering silent prayers to the heavens, while Thomas worked tirelessly in their small garden, hoping that one day they would be able to share their fresh vegetables with a child of their own. The couple's house stood next to a high wall of old stones, covered in ivy and moss. On the other side stood the legendary garden of the witch god Hel, a mysterious woman who was rarely seen by the villagers. Stories about her power and cruelty circulated like the wind through the narrow streets, but few could confirm their veracity, as those who dared to approach her lands were never seen again. One spring morning, when the first rays of sunlight were still struggling to break through the mist, Anna discovered that she was pregnant. The news spread through the village like pollen on the wind, bringing joy and celebration. Thomas, ecstatic, immediately began preparing the small room next to theirs, imagining the day they would rock their baby to sleep. It was during the second month of pregnancy that the cravings began. These were no ordinary pregnant cravings. Anna developed an overwhelming obsession with the radishes that grew in Gaffel's garden. She could see them from her window, their lush green leaves swaying seductively in the breeze, their fat, juicy roots occasionally visible when the strongest wind stirred up the loose earth. "They're the most beautiful I've ever seen," whispered Anna, her hands pressed against the glass of the window, eyes fixed on the forbidden garden. "Thomas, I feel like I'm going to go mad if I don't taste them." Thomas tried to grow his own radishes, but nothing he planted seemed to satisfy Anna's desire. She wasted away day after day, barely touching her food, her eyes always on Gothel's garden. After weeks of watching his wife waste away, Thomas made a decision that would change their lives forever. One moonless night, when the shadows were thickest and the silence deepest, Thomas climbed over the wall. His heart was pounding so loudly that he feared Gothel could hear him from across the garden. With trembling fingers, he plucked a few radishes and ran back to the house. Anna devoured the vegetables as if they were the most precious delicacy of the gods. And for the first time in weeks, she slept with a smile on her face, encouraged by his wife's success and happiness. Thomas repeated the feat the next night, and the next and the next. It was on the fourth night that everything changed. Jumping over the wall, Thomas found Gothel waiting for him in the garden. The witch was tall and imposing, her night-black hair contrasting with her moon-pale skin. Her eyes, green and penetrating, seemed to shine with a light of their own in the darkness. So, his voice was smooth as silk but sharp as a blade. "It is you who have been stealing my precious radishes." Thomas fell to his knees, trembling. "Please forgive me. My wife is pregnant and has developed an uncontrollable craving for your radishes. She can't eat anything else. She's wasting away." A sinister smile appeared on Gothel's lips. "Our life growing up? What an interesting coincidence. I've wanted a child of my own for so long." His eyes flashed with a terrible idea. "Let's make a deal then. Your wife can have all the radishes she wants, but in return, when the child is born, it will be mine." The horror of the proposal struck Thomas like a thunderbolt, but before he could protest, Gothel continued, "It's either that or I'll report your thievery to the kingdom. You will be executed, and the child will die before it is even born. The choice is yours." With a heavy heart and tears in his eyes, Thomas accepted the deal. He returned home carrying not only the radishes, but also the weight of his decision. In the months that followed, Anna received baskets and baskets of fresh radishes, never suspecting the terrible price they would pay for them. When the baby was born, it was a girl with hair as golden as the sun and eyes as green as emeralds. Anna barely had time to nurse her daughter for the first time before Gothel showed up to collect his debt. The witch named the child Rapunzel and disappeared with her into the night, leaving behind only the echo of the disconsolate sobs of a mother who had just lost her only child. Years passed, and Rapunzel grew up under Gothel's care in a house hidden in the forest. The witch, fearing that someone might try to steal the girl, planned to keep her close at all times. When Rapunzel turned 12, Gothel revealed her final plan. A stone tower that stood alone in the middle of the densest forest, with no doors or stairs, just a single window at the top. It was there that Rapunzel lived, her tears watering the stone floor while her golden hair grew in an extraordinary way, becoming her only connection to the outside world. Every day, Gothel would visit the tower, bringing food and company, climbing Rapunzel's long hair as if it were a golden rope, while humming, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, toss your braids." The years unfolded slowly in the lonely tower, where Rapunzel grew up in isolation, her days marked only by regular visits from Gothel. The witch, who insisted on being called Mama, dedicated herself to educating the young girl in the arts she considered appropriate: music, poetry, embroidery, and, curiously, the preparation of ointments and ointments with medicinal herbs. Rapunzel's hair, golden like rays of sunshine, continued to grow in an extraordinary way, reaching over 20 meters in length. Every morning, she spent hours combing it, watching it shine in the sunlight that came through the only window in her prison. During these solitary hours, she sang to herself, her crystalline voice echoing through the forest, attracting birds that became her only friends apart from Gothel. In her moments of solitude, Rapunzel developed an insatiable curiosity for the world beyond her window. She took advantage of every visit from Gothel to ask questions about life outside, about the people she occasionally saw passing in the distance, about the mysterious lights that floated in the sky on her birthday. The witch, however, always responded with warnings about the dangers of the outside world. "The world is full of cruel people, my flower," Godhel would say, stroking Rapunzel's golden hair. "Here you are safe. Here no one can hurt you or steal your special gift." Rapunzel never fully understood what gift Godhel was referring to, but she did notice something different about her hair. When she sang an ancient melody that the witch had taught her, they gave off a soft golden glow, and Godhel looked younger and more vigorous after brushing them. It was a mystery that the young girl kept in her heart, along with her dreams of freedom. To fill her days, Rapunzel developed various talents. As well as singing, she learned to paint using paints that Godhel brought her. The walls of her tower became a living canvas, filled with images of the world she imagined existed beyond her window. Verdant forests, crystal-clear lakes, bustling cities, and, above all, the mysterious floating lights that appeared once a year. One afternoon, while painting another of her visions of the outside world, Rapunzel noticed something different in the forest below. A group of travelers passed near the tower, their laughter and chatter reaching her like music. Hiding behind the curtain, she watched fascinated as they interacted with each other, their faces lighting up with genuine smiles. Something so different from Gothel's calculated smiles. What would it be like, she thought, to be part of that world? At night, lying in her bed, Rapunzel began to question her situation more intensely. Why did she need to be locked up? Why was Godhel the only person who could visit her? And why did her hair always have to stay so long? Her doubts grew like vines in her heart, but the fear cultivated by years of Gothel's warnings prevented her from taking action. The witch had painted such a terrifying picture of the outside world that Rapunzel felt torn between her desire for freedom and the terror of the unknown. In her 17 years, Rapunzel developed a routine to keep her sane. She woke up at sunrise, fed her little chameleon Pascal, an unexpected gift she had found in her window one day and managed to hide from Godhel, and began her daily chores. She cleaned the tower, combed her long hair, prepared her own breakfast with the supplies Godhel had brought, and devoted herself to her various artistic activities. Between one activity and another, she dreamed. He dreamed of the feel of the grass under his bare feet, of the coolness of a stream on his skin, of the wind blowing freely across his face. But most of all, she dreamed of discovering the meaning of the floating lights that appeared in the sky every year on her birthday. Godhel insisted that they were just stars, but Rapunzel knew that wasn't true. She had studied the stars for years, knew their positions, their movements. The lights were different. They appeared only once a year. They moved differently, and they seemed to call to her as if they were keeping a secret about her very existence. As her 18th birthday approached, Rapunzel began to feel a growing restlessness. Something inside her told her that it was time for a change, that she couldn't spend the rest of her life watching the world through a window. But how could she convince Godhel to let her leave? Even for a day, the answer to her prayers would come in an unexpected way, brought by a visitor who would change her destiny forever. But for now, Rapunzel continued with her daily routine, singing to the birds, painting her dreams on the walls, and waiting for the moment when her real life would begin. Pascal, her little green confidant, watched the changes in his friend's behavior with attentive eyes. The chameleon seemed to understand that something important was about to happen, something that would transform not only Rapunzel's life, but the entire kingdom that she didn't even know existed. The morning began like so many others in the lonely tower. Rapunzel woke up to the first rays of sunlight and began her daily routine, humming softly as Pascal watched her from the windowsill. However, something in the air seemed different, as if fate itself was about to knock on her door, or rather her window. The sound of horses' hooves echoed through the forest, something unusual in such an isolated region. Rapunzel, curious, cautiously approached the window, hiding behind the curtain. A young man on a magnificent white horse was galloping through the trees, apparently running away from something. His movements were agile and precise, but his expression showed concern. The rider, who Rapunzel would later discover was called Flynn Rider, seemed to be looking for a hiding place. His pursuers, royal guards on dark horses, were fast approaching. In a moment of desperation, Flynn spotted the lone tower and without hesitation began to climb it, using the old stones for support. Rapunzel, who had never interacted with anyone other than Godhell, panicked. Her first instinct was to hide, but something inside her, perhaps the same restlessness she had been feeling, made her stay put. When Flynn finally reached the window, he was greeted by a sharp blow from the frying pan that knocked him unconscious. "Pascal, what have I done?" whispered Rapunzel, looking alternately at her chameleon friend and the fated stranger on the floor. The little reptile turned an alarmed shade of red, indicating his concern. Her heart racing, Rapunzel examined the unconscious visitor. She had never seen a man so closely before, and something about him intrigued her. He didn't look at all like the terrible monsters that Godhell described in his stories about the outside world. On the contrary, he had harmonious features and was dressed elegantly, although his clothes were a little dirty from the run. As she watched him, she noticed something shiny falling out of his bag, a delicate crown set with jewels that sparkled in the sunlight. Rapunzel picked it up, marveling at its beauty, and as she placed it on her own head, she felt a strange familiarity that she couldn't explain. The sound of distant voices brought her back to reality. The guards were still searching the vicinity of the tower. Acting quickly, Rapunzel hid Flynn's unconscious body in her closet after tying it up tightly with her own hair, a precaution that seemed sensible at the time. "Rapunzel, let me up, my flower." Garfel's voice echoed from outside, making the young woman's heart leap. With frantic movements, she hid the crown in a ceramic vase and ran to the window. During Garfel's visit, Rapunzel could barely concentrate. Her mind was torn between the man hiding in her closet and the possibilities his presence represented. When she finally managed to get rid of Godhell, who left for a 3-day trip in search of rare herbs, Rapunzel turned her attention to her prisoner. Flynn woke up confused and frightened, especially when he realized that he was bound by impossibly long golden hair. His expression of astonishment on seeing Rapunzel for the first time was something she would never forget, a mixture of admiration and incredulity. "Where is the crown?" were his first words, revealing more about his character than he had intended. "It's hidden where you'll never find it," Rapunzel replied with more confidence than she really felt. Then, mustering all her courage, she made a proposal that would change their lives forever. "I want to make a deal with you, Flynn Rider." The thief raised an eyebrow, puzzled. "How do you know my name?" "I heard the guards shouting." "Listen, I want you to take me to see the floating lights that appear in the sky on my birthday. In return, I'll give you back your crown." Flynn tried to argue, to explain that they were the lanterns of the royal festival, not mysterious lights, but Rapunzel was determined. After much negotiation, threats with the frying pan, and a few demonstrations of the magical power of her hair, which she accidentally revealed by healing a cut on Flynn's hand, they reached an agreement. The prospect of finally realizing her dream made Rapunzel's heart beat faster. As she prepared a small bag with the essentials for the journey, she chatted excitedly with Pascal about her first adventure. "Just imagine, Pascal, I'm finally going to find out what those lights are. And who knows?" She hesitated, looking at her reflection in the mirror, the memory of the crown on her head still vivid in her mind. "Maybe I'll find out more about myself." Flynn watched her animation with a mixture of amusement and curiosity. There was something special about that girl with the magical hair, something that went beyond her beauty or her extraordinary powers. She had an innocence and enthusiasm for life that he had long since lost in his adventures as a thief. The moment Rapunzel finally put her bare feet on the grass for the first time, the world seemed to stop. The sensations were overwhelming. The smell of the damp earth, the soft texture under her feet, the breeze caressing her face. She alternated between giggles of pure joy and moments of deep regret, questioning her decision to leave the safety of her tower. Flynn, observing her reactions, began to feel something change inside him. The mission that had initially been just a means of recovering the stolen crown was beginning to turn into something more meaningful. There was something about the way Rapunzel saw the world with such new and amazed eyes that made him question his own life choices. As they walked away from the tower, neither of them realized they were being watched. Between the shadows of the trees, A pair of eyes followed their every move, and a plan began to form in the depths of a vengeful mind. Rapunzel's adventure was just beginning, and it would be far more dangerous than she could have imagined. The journey through the forest proved to be a life-changing experience for Rapunzel. Each new discovery provoked reactions of pure enchantment, from the sweet taste of wild fruit to the reflection of the sun in the crystal-clear waters of a stream. Flynn, for his part, found himself increasingly fascinated by the way his traveling companion saw the world through such pure and amazed eyes. During a rest stop, sitting by a small lake, Rapunzel decided to share more about her life in the tower. "You know, Flynn, Godel always told me that the outside world was dangerous and cruel, but so far I've only found beauty and kindness," she commented while absent-mindedly playing with a wildflower. Flynn felt a pang of guilt when he heard those words. After all, he was a thief, precisely the kind of person Godel had warned Rapunzel about. Yet something was changing inside him. Every genuine smile from Rapunzel, every moment of shared discovery, caused his old values to begin to dissolve. "It's not all that simple, Rapunzel," he replied, choosing his words carefully. "The world has its real dangers, but it also has its magic. I think the key is to learn how to navigate between the two." As they talked, Pascal, the ever-attentive chameleon, noticed suspicious movements among the trees. The little reptile quickly changed to an alert orange hue, drawing Rapunzel's attention. Not far away, the royal guards were still searching for Flynn and the stolen crown. With agility acquired from years of escapes, Flynn guided Rapunzel along an alternative path, their hands naturally intertwined as they ran between the trees. Rapunzel's long golden hair, while making escape difficult, proved useful at various times, serving as a rope to cross ravines or as improvised camouflage. Afternoon was beginning to fall when they reached a small tavern on the edge of the forest, the Naughty Duckling. Flynn hesitated for a moment, knowing the reputation of the place well, but they didn't have many options for shelter. To his surprise, what began as a potentially dangerous situation turned into one of the most memorable experiences of the trip. The tavern goers, despite their rough appearance, were completely captivated by Rapunzel's sincerity and enthusiasm. Before long, muscular thugs were singing about their secret dreams of becoming pianists, dressmakers, and collectors of ceramic unicorns. The young woman discovered that appearances really could be deceiving, and that there was goodness in the most unlikely places. During the evening in the tavern, Flynn watched Rapunzel with a new eye. He saw how she could see the best in people, how her presence brightened up the gloomiest of surroundings. For the first time in a long time, he began to question his own life choices and the path he had taken so far. However, the momentary peace was interrupted by the unexpected arrival of the royal guards. The tavern's customers, now unlikely allies, helped the couple escape through a secret passage at the back of the establishment. As they ran through the dark tunnel, Rapunzel held Flynn's hand tightly, her heart beating fast, not just from the danger, but from the thrill of the adventure. "Flynn," she whispered as they walked through the damp tunnel. "What's her real name?" The question took him by surprise. After a moment's hesitation, he answered softly, "Eugene Fitzherbert. Eugene." Rapunzel repeated the name fondly, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel ashamed of his true identity. As they emerged from the tunnel, they found themselves in a deep canyon with an ancient dam at the bottom. The sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. The beauty of the moment was interrupted by the sound of horses' hooves and altered voices. The guards had found another route. In a moment of tension, they found themselves trapped between the royal guards and a group of bandits who were also chasing Flynn for the stolen crown. It was at this critical moment that Rapunzel demonstrated all her ingenuity, using her magical hair in ways that even she herself didn't know were possible, as a rope, a whip, a safety net. During their frantic escape across the dam, something definitely changed between them. When Flynn chose to save Rapunzel rather than retrieve the crown that had fallen, they both realized that their hearts had found something more valuable than any royal treasure. Drenched and exhausted, but alive, they found refuge in a small clearing near a stream. As they dried their clothes by a makeshift fire, a new intimacy grew between them. Rapunzel shared more about her life in the tower, her moments of solitude, and her dreams of freedom. Eugene, for his part, shared stories of his childhood in the orphanage and how he became Flynn Rider. What neither of them knew was that not far away, Godhel had discovered Rapunzel's escape. The witch, consumed by rage and the fear of losing her source of eternal youth, was plotting a sinister plan to recover her precious flower. The shadows of the coming night held secrets that would soon change the fate of everyone involved in this story. As the stars began to dot the night sky, Eugene and Rapunzel sat by the fire, their hands occasionally touching, their hearts beating to a new rhythm. Pascal watched everything with his attentive eyes, changing to a rosy hue that reflected the romantic moment unfolding before him. Dawn brought with it the promise of the big day. Finally, Rapunzel would see the floating lights she had dreamed of. Eugene noticed how she could barely contain her excitement as they approached the city. Her green eyes shone with an intensity that rivaled the sun itself, as she absorbed every new detail of the urban environment that unfolded before her. The city was celebrating its annual Lantern Festival in memory of the lost princess. Colorful banners decorated the cobbled streets, musicians played on every corner, and children danced to the sound of joyful melodies. Rapunzel, completely enchanted, dragged Eugene from stall to stall, trying sweets, admiring handicrafts, and taking part in folk dances. During a dance in the main square, Eugene couldn't take his eyes off her. Her golden hair, now expertly braided with colorful flowers by a group of local girls, shone in the sunlight. Her smile lit up the whole room, and her joy was contagious. It was at that moment that Eugene realized he was hopelessly in love. Meanwhile, in the shadows of the alleyways, Godhel watched her flower with a mixture of anger and determination. The witch had arrived in the city following the clues left by the pair, and was now planning her next move. She noticed how Rapunzel looked at Eugene, recognizing the nascent love in his eyes, a love that threatened to destroy everything Godhel had built over the years. As the day progressed, Eugene surprised Rapunzel with a small boat. To get the best view of the lanterns, he explained, helping her aboard. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink as they rowed out into the middle of the lake that surrounded the castle. Eugene, Rapunzel whispered, her fingers playing nervously with a lock of hair. What if it's not everything I dreamed? What if it's exactly as I dreamed? What do I do then? He held her hands gently, his eyes meeting hers. Then you find a new dream, he replied with a gentle smile. The moment was interrupted by the first glow in the sky. The first lantern, released from the castle by the king and queen, rose alone in the night. Soon, thousands of other lanterns began to float around the city, creating a spectacle of light that reflected off the calm waters of the lake. Rapunzel was amazed, her eyes reflecting the golden glow of the lanterns. Eugene had prepared 2 lanterns for them, and together they released them into the sky, watching them dance among the others. The moment was magical, intimate, perfect. It was then that Eugene made a decision that would change everything. He took the crown out of his bag and presented it to Rapunzel. I don't want it anymore, he said softly. I've found something more valuable. Before Rapunzel could reply, a strange light on the shore of the lake caught her eye. There were 2 lanterns, positioned in a way that she recognized immediately. It was a sign from Godhel, one she had known since she was a child. Fear gripped her heart. Eugene, I need to check something, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I promise I'll be back soon. Eugene agreed to wait for her, not suspecting that this moment would mark a dramatic turning point in their lives. Rapunzel found Godhel waiting in the shadows, but the conversation that followed was not at all what she had expected. He's only interested in the crown, my flower, Godhel declared with false concern. Watch. Rapunzel watched in horror as 2 men appeared on the boat where Eugene was. From his position, it looked as if he was handing over the crown voluntarily, leaving with them. In fact, Eugene was being attacked, but the distance and darkness masked the truth. Heartbroken, Rapunzel allowed Godhel to take her back to the tower, convinced that her dream of love had only been an illusion. What she didn't know was that Eugene, after escaping from the bandits, ran desperately back to the meeting point, only to find the place empty. In the tower, while packing her things, Rapunzel began to notice details in her paintings on the walls. The sun symbol of the kingdom was unconsciously repeated in her drawings. Memories began to surface. The sun mobile over her cradle, the kind faces of the king and queen, the familiar sensation of trying on the crown. The revelation struck her like a thunderbolt. She was the lost princess. At the moment of this discovery, Eugene was climbing the tower, having finally found his way back. But Godhel was prepared. When he entered through the window, he was greeted not by Rapunzel, but by a dagger that seriously wounded him. "Eugene!" Rapunzel shouted, running towards him, but Godhel held her firmly. "Now, do you see what the outside world brings? Only pain and suffering," Godhel declared coldly. "But we can avoid that. Let me use your hair to heal you, and promise to stay with me forever." Eugene, gathering his last strength, approached Rapunzel. "Don't let it happen," he whispered. With a quick, decisive movement, he cut the long golden hair with a piece of broken glass. The hair turned brown, losing its magical power. Godhel, aging rapidly without the magic that kept her young, staggered backwards in panic, tripping and falling through the tower window. Rapunzel held Eugene in her arms, tears falling down her face. One last tear, still containing a remnant of magic, fell on the wound, miraculously healing it. True love had proved to be the most powerful magic of all. Days later, Rapunzel returned to the castle as the lost princess, reunited with her real parents amid celebrations and tears of joy. Eugene was forgiven for his past crimes, and together they began a new life, a life of love, adventure, and freedom. And so, the girl who dreamed of floating lights discovered that her true destiny was far greater than she had ever imagined. Not only did she find her place in the world, but she also brought light and joy to everyone around her, proving that sometimes the best dreams are the ones we didn't even know we had.